At the very end of regular show, a soft little man shaped like a lollipop, with a gentle old-fashioned voice, walks straight into the heart of a sun, pulling his own twin brother in with him to stop the universe from resetting itself the way it has over and over, every 14 billion years. His name is Pops, and for almost the whole show before this, he is just the harmless one, the owner of an ordinary park, the kind of place where two friends get paid to rake leaves, and mostly, lovingly, do not. That's the whole job. You're already lying there in the dark, so let me talk you down slow. Sit in that gap with me. A series literally called Regular Show ends with one gentleman dying to break a cycle that has wiped out the universe over and over. How do you get from raking leaves to that? That's the question we follow all the way down tonight, you and me. The silliest, gentlest character turns out to be an alien made of pure good, locked in a war older than time, choosing to die so the cycle finally breaks. A show about doing nothing becomes a show about the one thing worth doing everything for. You can let go now. Drift. The story carries you whether you remember the details or not, and if it keeps you company, a quiet subscribe keeps it coming back. Welcome to Velvo. Let's start on a perfectly normal day at the park. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me start at the end, because the end of this show is the strangest place I know to begin a story about two guys raking leaves. Stay lying down. You don't have to follow closely. I just want to hold one picture up for you in the dark and let it sit there until it stops making sense. Because the longer you look at it, the less it looks like a cartoon and the more it looks like something somebody needed to say. Here it is, a small soft man shaped like a lollipop, a round pink head on a thin little body, a gentle old-fashioned voice, the kind of character you'd put on a show to make small children laugh. His name is Pops. He owns a park, not a magic kingdom, not a fortress, just a local park, the sort of green patch with benches and trees and a snack bar where a couple of employees are supposed to be working and mostly aren't. That is who he is for years. The owner, the harmless one, the man who says nice things and means them. And at the very end of the whole series, that same gentleman saves the universe by dying. He pushes himself, and his own twin brother along with him, into the heart of a sun. He stops everything from resetting. He chooses it. The softest character in the show turns out to be the one who pays the largest price anybody could pay, and he pays it on purpose, quietly, the way he did everything else. I want you to feel how far apart those two things are. On one end, a man who owns a park where nobody wants to do their job. On the other end, a god stepping into a star to break a cycle. And the show that holds both of those is called, of all things, Regular Show. That's the joke, and that's the whole heart of it at the same time. The most ordinary title you could possibly hang on a thing, stretched over a story about mortality, about love, about a sacrifice measured in billions of years. Think about what it takes for a title like that to be honest. The show has to earn the smallness first. It has to make you believe in the boredom, in the leaves, in the long afternoons where nothing happens. And then it has to turn that smallness inside out without ever telling you it's doing it. By the time you notice, you're already in too deep to leave. Let me put it as plainly as I can, because plain is what you want at this hour. Regular Show is an American animated sitcom, a man named JG. Quintel created it for Cartoon Network, and it aired from the 6th of September 2010 to the 16th of January 2017. On paper, the setup could not be lazier. And I mean that with affection. It's about two friends who work as groundskeepers at a park. They're supposed to rake the leaves, they're supposed to clean up. They mostly find ways not to. That's the engine of most episodes. Two slackers, one boring chore, and the endless creative effort of avoiding it. And then the finale asks one of them, asks the gentlest one to die for the cosmos. Pops, the lollipop man voiced by Sam Marin, the owner of this nothing little park, turns out to be tied to the fate of all things. He and his twin brother are fated to fight each other for the universe every 14 billion years. 14 billion. That's not a season arc, that's longer than the universe we actually live in has existed. And in the end, he chooses to drift into a sun rather than let that war begin again. And his choice is the only thing standing between everything and a full reset. I have to stop here for a second, just as a person, because the first time that lands, it's genuinely a lot. A show I half watched in the background, a show with a talking gumball machine and a Yeti and a guy who is also a Blue Jay, ends on a note that quiet and that enormous. Okay, back to it. Because that gap, that distance between the title and the ending, is the thing we're here to understand tonight. Read this way, the gap isn't a flaw or an accident. The gap is the whole machine. The show promises you the ordinary right there in its name, promises you nothing will matter, promises you leaves and benches and slackers, and then it spends years quietly walking you toward grief and immortality, and a death that means something. The space between what it says it is and what it turns out to be is exactly the space the show lives in. So that's what I want to name out loud, as the one question we follow all the way down. How does a cartoon literally called Regular Show about two lazy friends raking leaves at a park end up being a story about immortality, about grief, about a gentle man dying to save the universe? And underneath that, the softer question, the one that's really keeping me up, what is it quietly trying to tell us about ordinary life? And here's a thought I keep turning over, so let me hand it to you while you're drifting. A show about doing chores at a dead-end job turning out to secretly be about mortality is, when you sit with it, a strangely comforting idea. What this suggests, if you let it, is that the boring days aren't separate from the big ones. The raking and the dying are the same story. The park and the sun are the same place, just seen from different ends. For someone lying awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like the days are small and repetitive and going nowhere in particular, there's something gentle in a show that says, no, look closer. The small repetitive days are where the whole thing actually happens. The cosmic stakes were hiding in the chores the entire time. And maybe that's why it sticks with people the way it does. You go in expecting a goof about two friends slacking off, and somewhere along the way, it quietly tells you that the slacking, the friendship, the wasted ordinary afternoons were never the empty part of your life. They were the part that mattered most. They were the thing the whole universe was built to protect. Now, none of this works if you have to hold it in your head, so don't. That's the deal we're making here, you and me. You're not studying, you're not going to be quizzed. You can let your eyes close right now and stop trying to keep the name straight, because I'm going to carry it for you. The Lollipop Man, the twin brother, the sun, the 14 billion years. I've got all of it. If a detail slips away from you, it'll come back around. The story keeps going whether you're awake for every turn or not. You can just rest inside it and let it move under you like a current. So before we ever get to the sun, before we get anywhere near the end of all things, we have to go back to where it actually starts, to that perfectly ordinary park, to the strange, sleepy calm of a show that's in no hurry at all, and to the way that calm becomes the most important thing about it. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the park itself, before any of the cosmic weight arrives, when it was just a place where two friends were supposed to be working. Forget the sun for a while. Forget the twin brother and the billions of years and the dying. None of that is here yet. Right now there's only grass and trees and a wide flat afternoon with nothing much going on in it. And that emptiness is the most important thing I can give you tonight, because the show builds everything else on top of it. Picture the place, a local park, not a famous one, not a landmark, just the kind of green space a town has on its edge, the sort you've driven past 100 times without really looking. There are paths. There are benches, there are big old trees that drop their leaves in slow drifts across the lawn, which matters because somebody is supposed to rake those leaves, and that somebody is the whole reason any of these characters know each other at all. There's a snack bar tucked off to one side. There are golf carts, the little open kind, that the employees drive around far faster and far more recklessly than anybody driving a golf cart ever should. And there's a house, a big rambling house right there on the grounds, where some of the staff actually live, so that work and home and friendship all fold into the same patch of land. The job follows you home because home is the job. You wake up where you work. That detail does quiet things to the whole feel of the show, and we'll come back to it. I want you to settle into how soft this all is. There's a warmth to that opening world that I think people underrate. It's green, it's a little rundown, it's lived in. It feels like late afternoon even when it isn't. Nothing about the park is trying to impress you. It's a place where the most urgent thing on the schedule is a pile of leaves that isn't going to rake itself. And even that can wait. And everybody knows it can wait. And that shared understanding that nothing here is really an emergency is part of what makes it feel safe to lie down inside of. You're not bracing for anything. The park doesn't ask you to brace. And honestly, that's rarer than it sounds. A lot of stories grab you by the collar in the first 30 seconds. This one just opens a gate and lets you wander in. Let me linger on the feel of the place a little longer, because the feel is the whole point, and you've got nowhere to be. The light first. So much of this world reads as golden as that particular hour of the day when the sun's coming in sideways and everything goes a little soft at the edges. The long shadows of the trees stretching across the grass. The kind of light that makes even a half-raked lawn look like somewhere you'd want to fall asleep. And the sound of it, or really the lack of sound. A park like this is quiet in a specific way. There's wind in the leaves. There's the far-off hum of a cart somewhere across the grounds. There's the small clatter of somebody not quite working. But underneath all of that, there's a stillness. A sense that the day is wide and slow and in no rush to become anything. Nothing is ticking, nothing is counting down. The clock that runs everybody else's life seems to have eased off here, and the show wants you to feel that easing in your own chest. And it's a place you could map without trying, which matters more than it sounds. After a while, you just know it. You know where the snack bar is, you know the lawn where the carts tear around. You know the house, which room is whose, where everybody ends up when the day winds down. The park has a geography you carry in your body the way you carry the layout of a child at home, and that familiarity does something tender to the watching of it. You're not visiting a new place every episode, you're coming back to one you already know by heart. And there's deep comfort in returning in the way the same benches sit in the same spots, in the way the place is exactly where you left it. Few shows let you feel at home this completely, and this one does it on purpose, brick by brick, lawn by lawn. I could honestly just describe this park to you all night and call it a good night's sleep, but there's a job here too, so let me get to it. So let me lay out the daily texture of it, the actual shape of a normal day, because the normal day is the foundation, and I want you to feel how grounded it is. The premise is plain. The show is set at a local park, and the main characters work there as groundskeepers. That's the job: groundskeeping, maintenance, the unglamorous, never-finished work of keeping a public green space from falling apart. There are leaves to rake, yes, but also trash to pick up, things to fix, equipment to drag around, chores that pile up the way chores always do, in that endless low hum of small tasks that no one ever truly gets to the bottom of. It is, on purpose, the least exciting work you can imagine handing to a cartoon. Nobody's saving anything. Nobody's chosen. They're just supposed to tidy a park. And there's a structure to it, the way any job has a structure. There's a boss. There's somebody whose entire role in the day is to notice that the work isn't getting done and to be visibly loudly unhappy about it. That tension, the worker who'd rather do anything else, and the boss who needs the thing done now, is one of the oldest engines there is, and the show leans on it like a familiar chair. There's the snack bar, which is its own little world, a place to stand around, a place to eat, a place to avoid the leaves for another 20 minutes. There are the golf carts, which turn the simple act of getting from one end of the grounds to the other into something faintly thrilling and faintly stupid. And there's that house on the grounds, the shared living space, so that when the workday ends, the cast doesn't scatter to separate corners of a city, they stay. They're still together, the park holds them after hours the same way it holds them during. And all of those pieces, the boss and the snack bar and the carts and the house, they aren't just set dressing, they're the gears the whole thing turns on. The boss exists to apply pressure, to be the reason the core can't be put off forever, to give the friends something to push against. The snack bar exists as the off switch, the place you retreat to when the pushing gets to be too much, a little island of doing nothing in the middle of a place that keeps asking you to do something. The carts exist to make movement fun, to turn even the commute across the lawn into a small adventure. And the house exists so the stakes never fully leave, so the job and the friendship and the rest are all stacked in one spot. It's a tiny ecosystem, really, balanced just so. Everything in it has a job, even the things that exist mainly to help everybody avoid their jobs. And once you see those gears, you start to notice them clicking under every episode, the same handful of pieces, rearranged 1,000 different ways. Sit with that for a second, because it's gentle, and it's a little sad, and it's a big part of the mood. These are people whose whole lives happen in one place. They work where they live, and they live where they work. And the boundary between the two more or less dissolves. They're coworkers or they're roommates. Their boss is, in a strange way, family. The park isn't somewhere they go. It's where they are. And when a show keeps its people in one place like that, day after day, episode after episode, you start to feel the place the way they feel it. It stops being a set. It starts being home. I'll be honest, the first time I really clocked that they live where they work, something about it landed a little melancholy on me, in a way I didn't expect from a goofy cartoon. Anyway, back to the rhythm of it, because here's where the comfort really lives, and I want to walk through it slowly. Regular show has a formula, a signature shape that most of its episodes follow. And far from being a weakness, that predictability is one of the kindest things about it, especially at this hour. So, let me describe the shape gently, the way you trace a path you've walked 100 times. An episode opens small. It opens with something completely ordinary. Something the size of real life. Somebody has a chore to do and doesn't want to do it. Somebody wants a snack or a day off or to win a stupid bet or to avoid a stupid bet. Somebody breaks a small rule or makes a small wish or takes a small shortcut to get out of doing the work. It begins, in other words, exactly where your own boring afternoons begin. A basic low-stakes problem. The kind of thing that would never ever matter. And I want to dwell on that opening beat because it's easy to skate past and it's doing so much quiet work. The smallness of these starting problems is almost a dare. The show is daring you to believe nothing's going to happen. It plants you in the most deliberately uneventful moment it can find. Two friends putting off a chore, a minor disagreement, somebody wanting one specific snack. And it lets that moment breathe a little, lets the boredom feel real, lets you settle all the way into the ordinariness of it before it does anything at all. That patience is the trick. If the show rushed to the weird part wouldn't mean anything. You have to be lulled first. You have to genuinely believe you're watching a cartoon about two guys avoiding work with no idea the floor is about to drop out, and the show is very, very good at making you believe exactly that. It earns the smallness every single time before it spends it. And then the strangeness arrives. Episodes typically begin with that basic problem and then escalate when a magical, supernatural, or strange element complicates the situation. That's the turn. The small, ordinary thing brushes up against something that should not exist, and the whole episode lifts off the ground. The shortcut summons something that should not be able to grant wishes. The dumb bet attracts the attention of some entity with far too much power and far too much investment in whether two guys finish a chore. The mundane cracks open and the impossible pours through, and suddenly a story that started over a pile of leaves is hurtling towards stakes that are cosmic, or at least cosmic-shaped. Monsters, curses, beings from somewhere else. The escalation goes as far as it wants to go, and it usually wants to go very far. And then, almost always, it comes back. The chaos crests, the strange thing is faced down or outrun or outlasted, and the episode lands the cast more or less back where they started. Back at the park. Back to the leaves. Back to the boss. Back to the snack bar. Back to the ordinary afternoon. A little singed maybe, a little wiser maybe, but home. Small problem, strange escalation, return to normal. That's the cycle. That's the breathing pattern of the whole show. Now here's the thing I really want you to feel about that pattern, and I'll mark this as me reading into it rather than the show saying it out loud. The reliability of the formula is its own kind of lullaby. You always know roughly where an episode is going, even when the middle goes completely insane. You know it'll start somewhere small. You know something impossible will crash into it. You know that by the end, the park will still be standing, and the friends will still be friends, and the afternoon will more or less resume. And that knowing is a comfort. It's the same comfort as a song with a chorus you can feel coming. The surprises all live in the middle, in the wild, specific shape of whatever strangeness shows up this time, but the frame around the surprises never moves. You can let go inside a structure like that. You can stop guarding yourself because you already know the shape of the safe landing. And before I carry on, since you're lying there letting this wash over you, let me just say it plainly and only once. If this slow walk through a quiet little park is doing for you what it's doing for me, hitting subscribe is a small, kind thing that helps these long, sleepy stories find the next person who needs one at 2 in the morning. That's all. Now let your shoulders drop and let's keep going. So sit with how steadying that rhythm is, because I genuinely think it's the secret to why the show can do everything it later does. The small problem, the strange escalation, the return to normal. That 3-beat pattern is the heartbeat of the thing, and I mean that almost literally. It's the pulse you feel under every single episode, the steady thump underneath all the noise. Early on, when the stakes are silly, the heartbeat is easy to ignore, the way you ignore your own pulse when nothing's wrong. But it's always there. And here's why it matters so much for where we're eventually going. That same rhythm, that exact same shape, is what's going to carry the heavy stories later. When the show stops being only silly, when it starts reaching for grief, for time, for loss, for the gentleman and the sun we talked about, it doesn't invent a new structure to do it. It uses this one. The same heartbeat that pumped under an episode about a sandwich or a video game or a botched chore is the heartbeat that pumps under the saddest, largest moments the show ever attempts. The frame was load-bearing the whole time. You learn the rhythm while the stakes are nothing, so that when the stakes become everything, your body already trusts the beat. And there's a generosity in that when you think about who this show was for. It's a cartoon. It aired for kids, for teenagers, for adults half watching after a long day. Most of the people who found it weren't sitting down to study structure or brace for grief. They were just hanging out with it, the way you hang out with a show that's easy to be around. And the rhythm meets all of them where they are. If you only ever want the silly version, the rhythm gives you a reliably satisfying silly episode. Every time. If you stay long enough to want more, the same rhythm is quietly ready to hold more, to carry weight the early episodes never hinted it could carry. It asks nothing of you up front and rewards you anyway if you keep coming back. That's a kind thing for a show to do. It lets you take exactly as much as you're ready for and it never makes you feel behind. That's a quiet kind of craft, and it's the kind you only notice looking back. The show spends its early life teaching you, gently, without you realizing you're being taught, what a regular show episode feels like. The opening calm, the lurch into the impossible, the settle back down. By the time it asks you to feel something enormous, you've internalized the rhythm so completely that it can break your heart inside the exact same shape that used to just make you laugh. The comfort and the devastation ride the same rails. You were being prepared the whole time, on those lazy afternoons, for a beat you didn't know was coming. Let me pull back though from the rhythm to the place itself, because there's one more idea I want to leave with you before we move on, and it's the one that quietly reframes everything. The longer you spend at this park, the more you start to suspect that it isn't really a workplace at all. I mean, it is. There's a job, there's a boss, there are chores nobody finishes. But functionally, in terms of what the show actually does with it, the park is less a place of employment and more a little universe with its own rules. A self-contained world, a pocket of reality where the normal laws bend whenever the story needs them to and snap back when it's done. Think about what this place quietly tolerates. One week, it's a perfectly mundane shift, leaves and snacks and a grumpy boss. The next week, it's a journey through time or through space or into some other dimension entirely, and then the week after that, it's back to leaves again, as if nothing happened. And read this way, the park functions like a stage that can hold absolutely anything. A mundane Tuesday or a trip across the cosmos, and the boards never warp under the weight of either. The set is the same, the benches are the same, but what that set is willing to contain has no real ceiling. There's a strange logic to it that the show implies rather than explains, a sense that this particular patch of grass sits on some kind of seam, some thin place where the ordinary and the impossible are always closer than they should be. The park doesn't react to the weirdness the way a real place would. It absorbs it. It's built to absorb it. And the people in it absorb it the same way, which is part of what tells you this place runs on its own rules. Think about how a normal person would respond to the things that happen here, to the monsters and the wishes that come true, and the holes that open up in the middle of an ordinary shift. They'd be undone by it. They'd never recover. But the cast treats the impossible as roughly another thing on the to-do list, an inconvenience that's gotten between them and the leaves. They're startled, sure, they panic in the moment, but there's an underlying acceptance baked into all of them. A sense that, of course, the strange thing is happening, the strange thing is always happening, that's just what this park does on a Tuesday. And read this way, that shared shrug is the clearest sign that the park isn't governed by our laws. It's a world with its own physics, its own tolerance for the bizarre, and everyone who lives there has quietly agreed to its terms. They don't ask why the impossible keeps finding them, they just deal with it and get back to the core. Because in here, that's normal. The title means it. This is the regular show. Regular by the standards of a place where the rules of reality are politely optional. And there's a small detail tucked in there that I find genuinely lovely, so let me hand it to you. For all the cosmic chaos this stage hosts, week after week, year after year, the cast never seems to age out of it, never seems to be fed by it, or worn down to nothing by it in the way real people would be. The strangeness rolls through, and they're still there, still standing in the same park, ready for the next ordinary morning. The stage holds them, it doesn't consume them. They get to keep being themselves no matter how large the story around them swells. There's something almost protective in that, like the place itself is looking after them, keeping them whole through every impossible thing it throws their way. Hold on, let me just sit with that for a beat, because it's quietly a beautiful idea, a little world that can contain anything and still keep its people safe. Okay, so that's the foundation, that's what I needed you to feel before we go any further, while you're warm and drifting and not trying to hold on to anything. A soft green lived-in park, a gentle dead-end job with a boss and a snack bar and golf carts and a house where the workers actually sleep. A reliable, soothing formula, small problem into strange escalation into safe return, beating steadily under every story like a pulse. And the slow realization that this nowhere little park is really a tiny universe, a stage that can hold the mundane and the cosmic with equal ease and never tip over. That's the ground we're standing on. That's the baseline calm the whole series will eventually disturb, and then, gently, restore. It's worth knowing where this calm even comes from, by the way, before we meet the people who live inside it. The whole thing grew out of one person's life. Regular Show was created by J.G. Quintel, and he built it out of his own experiences at the California Institute of the Arts, out of Cal Arts, out of the student films he made there, which is part of why the park feels so lived in, I think. The boredom is remembered, not invented. The dead-end job texture, the slacking, the friends killing time on somebody else's clock, All of it has the slightly worn, slightly true feel of a thing somebody actually went through and then turned into a world. It started small and personal, a few student films, a guy drawing on what he knew, and from that it grew into something huge. The series ran for 8 seasons. The episode count most people land on once they count everything is 261, though some listings put the broadcast total a little lower. 8 seasons, more than 200 trips through that same gentle rhythm, all of it spun out from one art student's memory of an ordinary job. And it had a precise beginning, a real first day, which I find grounding to know. Regular show premiered on the 6th of September in 2010 on Cartoon Network with an episode called The Power. Season 1, Episode 1, that was the doorway that first night. A little over 2 million people were watching, 2.097 million to be exact, and somewhere in that audience were the people who'd follow this nothing little park all the way to the heart of a sun, though of course none of them knew it yet. They just tuned in to a new cartoon about 2 guys at a park, the same way you'd think you were settling in for something light and small. But a park is only ever as alive as the people standing in it, and this one runs on 2 in particular, 2 friends at the dead center of every leaf and every catastrophe. So let me bring you to them next, to the 2 slackers the whole show is really about. At the center of that park are 2 friends who would do almost anything to avoid the work they're actually paid to do, and they are the reason any of this lands the way it does. Not the talking gumball machine, not the Yeti, not the surreal monsters that come crashing through the back half of every other episode. Those are the fireworks. The 2 friends are the ground you stand on while the fireworks go off. So let me slow all the way down and introduce them properly, because these are the people we're going to spend the most time beside tonight, the 2 faces you'll be lying next to as the hours go by. And you should know them the way you know people you've actually lived alongside. There's a blue jay, his name is Mordecai. He's 23 years old, he works at the park as a groundskeeper, and he's the closest thing this show has to a comm center. Picture him tall and lanky, a soft blue with a band of white across his face, the kind of guy who slouches even when he's standing still. He's voiced by J.G. Quintel, who, and I want you to hold on to this, is also the man who created the entire show. The person who dreamed the whole thing up is also the voice in your ear playing the lead. So when Mordecai sounds a little tired, a little dry, a little like he's narrating his own slightly disappointing life from somewhere, just behind his own eyes, that's not an accident. That's the creator pouring a version of himself directly into the character. There's a closeness there you can feel even before you know it's there. And then there's the raccoon, Rigby, also 23, also a groundskeeper at the same park, voiced by William Salyers. If Mordecai is the calm center, Rigby is the chaos that orbits it. He's small and scrappy and low to the ground, a brown raccoon with a striped tail that drags behind him, and he is lovingly kind of a disaster. Loud where Mordecai is quiet, reckless where Mordecai hesitates, the friend who has the bad idea, and then defends the bad idea, and then doubles the bad idea when it starts going wrong. The 2 of them together are the whole show. The 2 main protagonists, everything else, the park, the boss, the monsters, the universe itself, all of it is built around these 2, and the strange, sturdy, deeply ordinary friendship between them. Let me sit with that friendship, because it's the thing I most want you to track as we go. Mordecai and Rigby aren't co-workers who happen to share a job. They've been best friends since childhood. They go back further than the park, further than the job, further than any of the cosmic nonsense waiting in the wings. They have the kind of friendship where the conversation never really started because it never really stopped, where they finish each other's dumb sentences, where the shorthand between them is so worn in that an outsider can barely follow it. You know the kind. The friend you don't have to explain yourself to. The friend where silence isn't awkward, it's just 2 people existing in the same room. Content. That's them. And the show is smart enough to build everything on top of that foundation first, before it ever asks the friendship to carry any weight. Let me sit a little longer with the 2 of them as people, because I want you to be able to picture them clearly even with your eyes closed, even if you've never seen a single frame of this show. Start with Mordecai the Blue Jay. He's the taller of the 2, the one who hangs back half a step, the one who, if you put the 2 of them in a doorway, would be the one going second. He's the worrier, the one with the crush he won't admit to, the plan he won't follow through on, the slightly anxious sense that he should probably be doing more with his life, and the matching refusal to actually do it. There's a gentleness to him, a basic decency that the show leans on again and again. When something goes really wrong, Mordecai is usually the one who feels bad about it first. He's the conscience of the pair, even when his conscience loses the argument, which it often does, usually to a raccoon. Because then there's Rigby, and Rigby is the argument his conscience keeps losing to. Small, loud, fast, allergic to caution in a way that goes beyond laziness into something almost like a worldview. Rigby doesn't just want to avoid work, he wants to win, constantly, at everything, including things that aren't competitions. He's the one who can't stand to lose a game, who can't let a dare go unanswered, who will turn a quiet evening into a catastrophe because somebody implied he couldn't do something, and now, obviously, tragically, he has to prove them wrong. He's insecure under all that noise, and the show knows it, and it makes him more lovable rather than less. He's the little brother energy of the friendship, the one who needs Mordecai more than he'd ever say out loud, the one who would, if you pushed him, admit that this Blue Jay is the most important person in his entire life, and then immediately deny he ever said it. Put those two temperaments side by side, and you get a dynamic that basically runs itself. Mordecai is the brakes, Rigby is the gas, and the comedy is the car going exactly where you'd expect when the gas keeps winning. But here's the part that makes it more than a comedy setup. Neither one of them is the straight man, not really. They take turns. Sometimes Mordecai is the voice of reason, and sometimes when it counts, he's the one who wants to do the dumb, exciting thing, and Rigby is the one going, wait, are we sure about this? They flip. They cover for each other. They balance the way two people who've known each other their whole lives learn to balance without ever deciding to. Here's the thing they do with all that history, though. Almost nothing. That's the joke, and it's a good one. These two have a job. The job is simple: rake the leaves, clean up the park, set up the chairs for the event. Move the boxes. Easy, honest, boring work, the kind of work that exists in every park and every store and every office in the world. And Mordecai and Rigby treat every single task like it's a personal insult, like the universe has singled them out for cruelty by asking them to pick up a rake. They are, both of them, completely allergic to actual work. Not lazy in a mean way, lazy in the most relatable way there is. Lazy the way you've been lazy on a Sunday when there's something you should be doing and the couch is right there. And the something can wait, surely it can wait, it can always wait. I'll be honest, this is the part of the show I felt seen by long before it ever got sad. Because I have absolutely been those two guys. I have spent more energy avoiding a small task than the task would ever have cost me, and there's something almost holy about how committed Mordecai and Rigby are to that exact instinct. Okay, let me get back to who they actually are. The shape of nearly every early episode is the same, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a chore. There's the two of them deciding, with total confidence, that they are not going to do the core the normal way, or sometimes that they're not going to do it at all. And then there's the spiral. Because in this show, avoidance doesn't just stay small. The shortcut they take to dodge the work cracks open into something enormous and strange and frequently life-threatening. They play a video game they shouldn't, and the game reaches out of the screen. They make a bet they can't back out of. They break a rule that turns out to be the one rule holding back something ancient and hungry. The leaves never get raked, but a portal opens. That's the rhythm. Mundane chore, stubborn refusal, cosmic consequence, and somehow, by the end, they're right back where they started. A little singed, ready to do it all again tomorrow. What I love about the two of them in those moments is the way they talk. There's a catchphrase energy to Mordecai and Rigby that's hard to put into words, but instantly recognizable the second you hear it. It's the energy of two guys who would genuinely rather be doing anything else and who narrate that feeling out loud constantly to each other. The hyping each other up over nothing, the shared little victory sounds when something dumb goes right, the way they egg each other on into decisions any reasonable person would walk away from. They have a whole private language of enthusiasm and complaint, and it's so specific, so lived in, that you start to feel like you're in on it. Like you're the third friend who's been hanging around the park long enough to know the bit. And there's a reason it sounds that lived in, that natural, and I think it's worth telling you because it changes how you hear every line. The voice actors didn't record their parts alone. A lot of shows do it that way. One actor at a time, in a booth, reading to nobody, and an editor stitches the conversation together afterward. Regular show didn't do that, at least not for the heart of it. They recorded together, in group sessions, in the same room, actually talking to each other. And you can hear it. That's why the timing between Mordecai and Rigby feels less like dialogue and more like eavesdropping. The overlaps, the interruptions, the way one of them is already laughing at what the other one's about to say, the little hesitations that no script puts in on purpose. That's two people in a room riffing the way real friends do. The realness of the friendship isn't only written, it's recorded, it's baked into the actual sound of the thing. If you're enjoying lying here with this and you'd like the rest of the story to find its way back to you on the next sleepless night, a quiet subscribe is the gentlest way to make sure it does, and then we'll keep right on going. Because there's a layer under all this slacking that I really want to plant in your mind now, early, while it's still easy to hold. These two are not kids. I know it's easy to file them that way. The art is round and bright, the humor is goofy, the structure feels like a hangout cartoon, and your brain wants to slot them in next to every other pair of animated buddies who get into scrapes. But the show is very deliberate about a single number, and the number is 23. Mordecai is 23, Rigby is 23. They are not teenagers killing time before their real lives start. They are adults. Their real lives have technically already started. This is it. The park is the job. The job is the life. And that one choice, that decision to make them grown men rather than boys, quietly changes everything about what their laziness means. Let me put it the way the show seems to mean it. When a teenager avoids their chores, that's just being a teenager. It's a phase, it's expected, it's almost charming, because everybody knows they'll grow out of it and the future is still this big open thing in front of them. But when a 23-year-old avoids their chores, day after day, year after year, at a dead-end job they have no plan to leave, that's something else. The show implies, without ever once lecturing you about it, that what we're watching isn't childhood at all. It's arrested adulthood. It's two grown men stuck at the very start of their lives, treading water, dodging the small responsibilities because the small responsibilities are a doorway to the big ones, and the big ones are terrifying. And the show knows it. That's the part that gets me. It's not naive about these two. It's not pretending the slacking is purely cute. There's a low, steady hum of something underneath it, a sense that the clock is running even while they pretend it isn't. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make it sound grim, and it isn't grim. Not on the surface. The surface is a blast. The surface is two friends having the time of their lives doing nothing, but read this way, with the ages in mind, the whole show tilts a few degrees, and once it tilts, you can't tilt it back. Every refusal to grow up is also a refusal to face something. Every wasted afternoon is an afternoon that doesn't come back. Think about who you knew at 23, or who you were. That specific age sits right on a fault line. Old enough that nobody's coming to tell you what to do with your life anymore. Young enough that it still feels, just barely, like you have all the time in the world to figure it out. It's the age where the safety net of being a kid has quietly been pulled away and most people haven't quite noticed yet, where you can still convince yourself that the real version of your life hasn't started, that this is the warm-up, that the actual thing is coming later. Mordecai and Rigby live right there in that exact pocket of denial, and the show plants them there on purpose. A job that asks nothing of them and gives nothing back, a routine they could run in their sleep, and a shared unspoken agreement to keep treating all of it like it doesn't count yet. Like the clock hasn't started, like there's no clock at all. But there is a clock. That's what the ages are there to tell you. The show, by being so specific about that number, is gently insisting that this matters, that these afternoons are not free, that the boredom they're so committed to escaping is also, somehow, their actual life passing by. And the quiet ache of that, for anybody lying awake who has ever felt their own years going by in a job or a routine that wasn't going anywhere, is part of why the show lands as deeply as it does. It's not judging them for being stuck. It understands being stuck. It just refuses to pretend the stuckness is weightless. They're 23 at the start, and you slowly realize that the show is going to let them get older. It's going to let time touch them. These aren't characters frozen in amber, the same age forever the way so many cartoon characters are, born 39, dying 39, never a wrinkle in between. The show ages with them. And I'm telling you now, early while you're warm and only half listening, because that fact that they grow, that time is real for them, is going to matter enormously by the time we reach the end. Hold it loosely, I'll carry it for you, but know that it's there. Now let me say the other thing I most want you to track, the bigger one, the one that took me an embarrassingly long time to notice and then felt obvious forever after. The friendship between Mordecai and Rigby is the true love story of the series. Not a romance. There are romances, and we'll get to them, and some of them are genuinely lovely, but none of them is the spine. The relationship the entire show is secretly about, the one every other arc bends around, is the bond between these two friends. Read it that way, and the show snaps into focus. The central relationship isn't a couple, it's a friendship. It's two guys who have loved each other plainly and unromantically and without ever quite saying it, since they were small. I think that's a rarer thing on television than it should be, and I think it's why the show reaches people the way it does. Most stories tell you the great love of your life is the person you fall for. Regular show quietly suggests the great love of your life might be your best friend, the person you grew up beside, the one who knows all your dumbest stories because he was there for most of them. And once you start watching it that way, you notice the show keeps quietly proving it to you. When the stakes get high, the thing that moves these two to act, the thing that overrides the laziness and the fear and the constant urge to bail, is rarely glory and rarely money. It's the friend. Mordecai will walk into something genuinely frightening for Rigby. Rigby, for all his selfishness, will put himself on the line for Mordecai in a way he'd never do for anyone or anything else. The slacking has a limit, and the limit is each other. They'll dodge every responsibility in the world except the one they have to each other, and that one they never dodge. Not once that it counts. There's a tenderness in how the show handles the worst of it, too. These two fight. Of course they fight. People who've been that close for that long know exactly where each other's bruises are, and sometimes they press on them. There are episodes where the friendship genuinely fractures, where one of them does something selfish enough that the other can't just laugh it off. And every time, the repair matters more than the rupture. They come back. They always come back. The show is telling you something about that kind of bond, that it bends, that it takes damage, that it absorbs the dumb cruelties two people inflict on each other over the years, and somehow keeps holding. That's a quiet argument that the friendships made of a lifetime of ordinary days are tough in a way that dramatic relationships often aren't. What this implies, if you sit with it, is that the relationship worth building a whole epic around isn't necessarily the romantic one. It's the one that's been there the longest. The one made of 1,000 boring afternoons rather than a handful of dramatic nights. The show takes the kind of bond we usually treat as a side note, the buddy, the wingman, the friend, and it puts that bond at the dead center and dares you to call it small. And here's the quiet trick of it. Because the friendship is the real love story, the show can do something devastating with it later that it could never do with a romance. It can put that friendship under the kind of pressure that breaks ordinary things. It can stretch it across distance, across time, across the literal expanse of the cosmos. And the only reason any of that strain means anything to us is that the show spent years convincing us the friendship was load-bearing first. It made us believe in the leaves and the video games and the dumb bets and the private language. It made us believe two slackers avoiding their chores was a friendship worth caring about. And once we believed that, it had us. Whatever it wanted to do to these two, we were going to feel it, because we'd already moved in. We'd already taken the third stool at the park. Let me pull back to the day-to-day for a moment, because I don't want to rush past how funny all of this is, and I don't want you drifting off thinking the show is heavy. It carries its weight lightly almost the whole way through. Day-to-day, the single most reliable source of laughs in the entire series is the tension between these two and the people they answer to. Mordecai and Rigby don't slack in a vacuum. There's someone whose entire job is to make them do their job. Someone standing between their boundless desire to do nothing and the actual running of the park. And the friction between the slackers and the authority above them is the show's most dependable comedy. It almost never misses. Picture the basic collision. Two guys who want more than anything to be left alone to mess around, and a workplace that keeps rudely expecting them to work. Somebody has to give them the tasks, somebody has to notice the tasks aren't done. Somebody has to lose their temper when the simple chore has once again somehow escalated into a hole in the fabric of reality. That collision is the heartbeat of the regular episodes. The normal ones, the ones before things get strange. It's the part of the show that feels the most like an actual workplace, the most like a job you've actually had, where there's the person who wants to coast and the person who can't let them. And the comedy doesn't come from anyone being a villain. It comes from everyone being a little bit right. The slackers are right that the work is boring. The boss is right that the work still has to get done. Nobody's wrong, exactly, and that's why it's funny instead of mean. I should say, because it surprises people, that this is not a show made purely for little kids, and the tone tells you that pretty fast once you're tuned to it. Cartoon Network rated it TV PG, and the show was made with direction to lean more adult than the network's earlier programming, to reach a bit older, to be a little more grown in its humor and its feeling. You can sense that in the bones of it. The jokes about dead-end jobs, the very specific texture of being in your 20s with no plan, the way the workplace frustration feels less like a kid's idea of a job and more like someone who has actually clocked in somewhere they didn't want to be. That maturity in the comedy is the same maturity that lets the show go where it eventually goes. A show genuinely made only for the very young couldn't end the way this one ends. The PG of it, the slight tilt toward adult, is the room the show needs to breathe. It's the permission slip for everything underneath. Quick aside, just me to you. I find it weirdly moving that a show this committed to two guys avoiding work is also a show that clearly understands work, the dread of it, the way a job you don't love can quietly become your whole identity. It's not mocking these two for slacking. It gets why they slack. Okay, coming back. So let me draw the picture all the way out before we move on. So you've got it whole. A park. Two friends at the center of it, Mordecai the Blue Jay and Rigby the Raccoon. Both 23, both groundskeepers, both gifted at the fine art of doing absolutely nothing. Best friends since childhood, fluent in each other. Two grown men, not boys, stuck at the start of lives they haven't figured out how to start, dodging the small responsibilities because the small ones lead to the big ones and the big ones scare them. A friendship the show treats correctly as the great love story of the whole series. And running through all of it, the steady comedy of two people who want to coast, colliding with a world that keeps asking them to work. That's the heart, that's the thing everything else is built on top of. Every monster, every musical episode, every leap into the surreal, every quiet, devastating turn waiting for us down the line, all of it rests on these two and the bond between them. Get them, and you get the show. Care about them, and the show can do anything it wants to you, and it will. But that collision I mentioned, the slackers against the world that wants them to work, doesn't happen against thin air. It has a face. There's one person whose whole existence is to stand between Mordecai and Rigby and their endless appetite for doing nothing. One person whose patience these two erode a little more with every passing day. And he's the one we have to meet next. Because the man who keeps this whole park turning is having a much harder time of it than anybody slacking off in the grass. Standing between those two and total chaos is their boss, a walking gumball machine whose entire job is to be ignored by them. His name is Benson, and the moment you really look at him, you start to feel a little sorry for him. He's a tall, round-topped gumball machine in a coat full of colorful gumballs you can see right through his chest, and he is the manager of the park. He's the one who hands out the work orders. He's the one who tells Mordecai and Rigby to rake the leaves, clean the snack bar, set up the chairs, fix the fence. And he's the one who watches them do absolutely none of it every single day, with the slow-burning patience of a man who already knows how this ends. I love Benson, and I want to be clear about why, because it's easy to write him off as just the angry guy who yells. He is the angry guy who yells. But there's a whole person under that anger, and the show knows it. His full name, when you finally hear it, is Benson Dunwoody. And there's something perfect about a gumball machine having a last name like that. A real, ordinary, grown-up name. He's voiced by Sam Marin, who, and this is one of those facts that quietly rearranges your sense of the show, also voices Pops and Muscle Man. So a huge chunk of the park, 3 of its loudest, most distinct personalities, all live inside the same throat. Once you know that, you can't unknow it. You start hearing the shared DNA, the way these very different characters all come from one performer stretching himself in 3 directions at once. But back to Benson, the thing that defines him week after week is the firing. The threat to fire Mordecai and Rigby is basically a recurring ritual, like a chore that comes around as reliably as the leaves do. Something goes wrong, usually because the guys cut a corner or chased some dumb idea instead of doing the actual task, and Benson finds out and his whole body goes rigid, and the gumballs in his chest, this is the detail that kills me, actually change color with his mood. When he's calm, they're a normal scatter of reds and yellows and greens. When he's furious, they flush to a deep glowing red, like a thermometer for his blood pressure. He fills up red and he leans in and he tells them, again, that they're fired, or that they're going to be fired, or that this is their last chance, the very last one. He means it this time. And here's the joke, the structural one underneath all the yelling. They're never actually gone. By the next episode, the slate is wiped clean, and they're back at the same table outside the same coffee shop, dodging the same work, and Benson is right there to be ignored all over again. The firing isn't a plot point. It's a heartbeat. It's the rhythm of the whole workplace. The sound of authority making a threat that everyone, including the authority, secretly understands as part of the dance. Let me sit with that for a second, because I think it's doing something sweeter than it looks. A boss who threatens to fire you constantly should be a nightmare. In a lot of shows, he'd be the villain, the suit, the guy you root against. But regular show pulls a quiet trick here. It makes the boss the one person who actually cares whether any of this survives. Think about it. Mordecai and Rigby do not care if the park falls apart. That's almost the whole bit. They'd happily let the leaves pile up to the rooftops if it meant one more round of a video game. The park is their hangout, their excuse, the backdrop for their lives. It is not their responsibility, not really, not in their hearts. Benson is the only one for whom the park is a responsibility. He's the adult in the room. He's the one lying awake, metaphorically, over whether the place stays open, whether the work gets done, whether the thing they all depend on keeps existing for one more season. His anger isn't cruelty. His anger is care that has nowhere good to go. And honestly, who hasn't been Benson? You know the feeling. You're the one person who read the email. You're the one who knows the deadline is real. You're standing there watching everyone treat the thing as a joke, and you can feel yourself becoming the buzzkill, the nag, the bad guy, purely because you're the only one keeping score. That's him. That's the whole tragedy and comedy of him at once. Okay, back to the park. Read this way, Benson is the show's quiet argument that the responsible person is not the enemy. He's just tired. He's been carrying a thing that nobody else will help him carry, and the show, to its enormous credit, never punishes him for it in the end. It's setting something up very patiently across years of episodes, because the series eventually rewards him for it. I won't spoil the shape of it now, that's a thread to pull on much later, but keep Benson somewhere in the back of your mind as we go. Hold on to the image of this exasperated gumball machine, red-faced and underappreciated, threatening to fire two guys who will never leave. The show has plans for him. It does not forget the people who showed up and did the work, even when, especially when, nobody noticed. There's a long arc bending toward a happy ending for this character, and the slow patience of that payoff is one of the most generous things the show ever does. There's also a deeper joke I can't let slide, the design of him. A gumball machine as middle management. What this suggests is a comedy logic that only works because the show commits to it completely and never ever explains it. Nobody on the show stops to wonder why their boss is a gumball machine. No episode pauses for an origin story about how a coin-operated candy dispenser came to file the park's paperwork. He simply is the manager, the way the sky is blue, and because the show treats it as the most normal fact in the world, you do too. That's the slacker surreal engine running underneath everything. The universe is full of impossible nonsense, talking machines and humanoid birds and whatever Pops is, and the characters just shrug and clock in. The weirdness isn't the point. The Tuesday is the point. And a gumball machine fretting over a work schedule is funnier and somehow more human than any realistic boss could ever be. It keeps the whole thing warm too, which matters for a show that's eventually going to go to some very dark and enormous places. Benson is a kind of release valve. When the stakes get cosmic later on, when the park is literally hurtling through space and the fate of everything is on the line, it still somehow all comes back to whether the leaves got raked and whether Benson is going to fire those two idiots over it. His exasperation is the gravity that keeps this surreal balloon tethered to the ground. He's the reminder that under the giant battles and the time travel and the impossible cosmic threats, this was always, at its core, a show about a guy trying to get his employees to do their jobs, and mostly failing, and coming back the next day to try again anyway. That's its own kind of quiet heroism when you slow down and look at it. Showing up, caring about the small, unglamorous thing, being the one who keeps the lights on while everyone else goofs off, and choosing to keep doing it, and choosing not to become bitter about it, or at least choosing to keep going despite the bitterness. Benson is the load-bearing wall of the whole park. You don't notice a load-bearing wall until you imagine the building without it. Take Benson out, and the place doesn't just get messier. It collapses. The leaves never get raked, the doors never open. The hangout that everyone treats as a given stops existing, because the one person holding it up walked away. But of course, a wall, even a load-bearing one, can't hold up a whole building alone, and Benson isn't carrying the park entirely by himself, because gathered around him is the rest of this strange little crew, the gentle old man, the immortal handyman, and the two who barely seem to work there at all. Around those two friends and their boss is a small crew of coworkers, and every single one of them is hiding more than the early episodes let on. That's the thing I want you to hold on to as we meet them, one at a time, slowly, the way the show itself introduces them. On the surface, this is just a cast of weirdos at a park, a lollipop man, a yeti, a loud green guy, and a little floating ghost. You could watch the first handful of episodes and file them away as background, as the goofy supporting players who exist to bounce off Mordecai and Rigby and fill out the world. And for a while, that's almost all they are. But the show is patient, and it's playing a long game with every one of them. And by the time you reach the end, you'll understand that not one of these characters is as simple as they first appear. So let me round them out gently, the way you'd introduce your own friends to someone who's never met them, where you start with the easy, warm stuff before you get to the parts that take a while to explain. Let's start with the one who's pure light, Pops. If you've never seen the show, picture this. A man whose head is an enormous, perfectly round lollipop, pale and smooth, balanced on a slim little body in a fancy old suit, like an aristocrat from 100 years ago who somehow wandered into a public park and decided to stay. He has this delicate, high, sing-song voice and a way of moving that's all gentleness, and a heart that is, as far as anyone can tell, completely without a single drop of malice in it. Pops is the lollipop-shaped character who owns the park, and he's voiced by Sam Marin. And the defining fact about him, the thing that makes him who he is is that he sees only good in the world, everywhere, in everyone, all the time. I mean that almost literally. Pops moves through this often cynical, often crude, often genuinely dangerous show like a man who has never once been told that the world can hurt him. He greets terrible things with delight, he claps his hands at small wonders, he says the word good, just good, drawn out and joyful, when something pleases him, which is constantly, because almost everything pleases him. He's the oldest soul in the cast in some ways, and the youngest in every way that matters, this childlike innocence wrapped up in the manners of an old-fashioned gentleman. And here's what I love about how the show uses him. In a world full of sarcasm, Pops is the one character who is incapable of it. He just doesn't have the equipment. When everyone else is rolling their eyes, Pops is the one looking up at the sky like it's the first sky he's ever seen. Picture him in an ordinary scene, because the ordinary scenes are where he shines. The gang is gathered somewhere, maybe arguing, maybe scheming, maybe deep in some dumb crisis of their own making. And there's Pops on the edge of it, beaming, not following the argument, not really part of the tension at all. Just happy to be among people he loves, happy that there's weather, happy that the lollipop in his hand or the song on the radio exists. He laughs at things that aren't jokes. He gets delighted by things the others have long stopped noticing. A butterfly, a nice hat, the simple fact that his friends are nearby. And the show lets these little moments breathe, lets you see him notice the world, and there's a strange tenderness in watching a grown man be that unguarded about being alive. He has this manner of speaking, too, all old-fashioned politeness and gentle enthusiasm, the kind of phrasing you'd expect from a storybook gentleman who time forgot. He'll call things jolly, he'll get tearfully grateful over the smallest kindness. He bruises easily emotionally because a heart that open has no armor on it, and when something does genuinely hurt his feelings, the whole room seems to dim because it feels wrong, like kicking something that was only ever trying to be nice to you. And then, just as quickly, he bounces back into delight because holding a grudge is another thing he simply doesn't have the equipment for. And it would be so easy for a character like that to be annoying, or to be a joke, the naive idiot who doesn't get it. The show never does that to him. It protects him. It treats his innocence as something precious rather than something to mock, and I think that's a real choice. A kind one because a lesser show would have made the sweet old man the butt of every gag. Regular show lets Pops be sweet and lets that sweetness be a strength, and you'll see much later just how much weight that gentleness is secretly carrying. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Now, the second member of the crew, and a complete tonal flip from Pops. Skips. Where Pops is delicate and floaty and pale, Skips is a wall of muscle. He's a yeti, big and broad and covered in white fur, with these enormous arms and a calm, deep level voice that almost never rises. He works at the park as one of the co-workers, the handyman, the fix-it guy, and he is voiced, and I still grin every time I say this, by Mark Hamill. Yes, that Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, the voice of the Joker in basically every animated thing for the last 30 years. He plays the quietest, steadiest, most grounded character in the entire show. And let me sit with that casting for a second, because the more you know, the better the joke gets. Mark Hamill, the man whose Joker laugh is one of the most famous, most unhinged, most gleefully evil sounds in all of animation, is here playing a character defined by calm, by patience, by being the rock everyone leans on when things fall apart. Read this way, that's a quiet little joke the show is telling, casting the voice of chaos as the embodiment of steadiness, and it's a joke that pays off in a way you can't see yet, because of how much pain this calm character is secretly carrying. We'll get there. For now, just enjoy the surface of it, the gentlest giant in the park, speaking with the voice of the wildest villain in the room. Here's how Skips works inside the story. Whenever the gang gets in over their heads, and they get in over their heads constantly because that's the engine of the whole show, the small, dumb decision that spirals into something cosmic and terrifying, Skips is the one who shows up and knows exactly what's going on. He's seen it before, he has the answer, he has the tool, or the ritual, or the ancient bit of knowledge that fixes the unfixable thing. And the show plays this completely straight. Some impossible monster appears, some curse activates, some piece of reality starts coming apart at the seams, and everyone panics, and then Skips walks in, takes one look, and goes, in that flat, calm voice, "Oh yeah, I know what this is." And he does. He always does. And the rhythm of that becomes one of the great reliable pleasures of the show. You learn to wait for it. The guys do something idiotic. The idiotic thing curdles into a genuine emergency, the sky going wrong, or some entity dragging itself into the world. And every other character is useless in that moment because every other character is as lost as the guys are. Mordecai and Rigby flail. Benson yells. And then there's this beat, this lovely little beat, where the door opens and the big calm shape of Skips comes through it. And the whole temperature of the scene changes because the audience knows what the characters are about to learn, that the one person who can actually handle this has just arrived. He doesn't gloat about it, he doesn't make a speech. He just deals with the impossible thing the way you or I would deal with a clogged drain. Methodically, a little tired, like it's Tuesday, and this is simply the work. There's something deeply comforting about a character like that, the one who is never afraid, the one who has the whole catastrophe handled before you've even finished panicking. But notice what that competence quietly implies even before the show ever spells it out. How does anyone come to know that much? How do you accumulate an answer for every impossible thing? You don't get that from a manual, you get it from time, from having been there, from having somewhere in your past faced down each of these horrors when it was new and terrifying and you didn't have the answer yet. Every calm fix is the residue of an old fright. The show hands you that competence as a gift, episode after episode, and only much later asks you to think about the cost of it. I want to pause here for just a second, friend to friend, because if you're enjoying the way we're taking this slow, sitting with these characters one at a time, that's exactly the kind of thing this little channel is built for. And having you along for the whole ride genuinely means a lot. Okay, back to the Yeti. Because that name, Skips. There's a reason he's called Skips, and it's the kind of detail that seems like a throwaway gag until the show decides, years in, to break your heart with it. He skips. Everywhere. He doesn't walk, he doesn't run, he moves by skipping, this big furry handyman literally skipping from place to place like a kid in a schoolyard. And for a long time it just reads as one more piece of the show's surreal furniture. Of course the Yeti skips. Why wouldn't he? But file that away. The why of it, the reason a man like this moves through the world that way, is one of the saddest, most beautiful things the show ever reveals. And when it lands, you'll think back to every casual skip you ever watched without a second thought. Here's the first seed I want to plant, and I'm planting it on purpose, gently so it's waiting for you later. Skips is far older and far sadder than he appears. The calm isn't just personality. The knowledge isn't just convenience. There's a reason he's seen everything before. A reason he always has the answer. And it's tied to the fact that he's immortal, that he has lived an enormously long time, and that a life that long doesn't come for free. He carries something. You can feel it under the calm if you're looking for it, this faint heaviness, this sense of a man who has buried more than he'll ever say out loud. The show implies it long before it ever explains it. So when we get to his real story, much later, remember that the steadiness was never the whole picture. The steadiness was the surface over something deep and old and aching. Now let me lighten the mood again, because this crew is built on contrast, and after the gentle innocent and the calm immortal, the show throws in pure, loud, gleeful crudeness. Muscle Man. He's a coworker too, this short, overweight, green-skinned guy, and his entire personality is the prank, the gross-out joke, the dare, the thing nobody else would do, done loudly, on purpose, for attention. He's the guy who's convinced he's the coolest person at the park when he is objectively the most ridiculous, and that gap between how cool he thinks he is and how he actually comes across is where most of his comedy lives. He's got this signature bit, this verbal tick that becomes a kind of running joke all on its own. He sets up a comparison, some big boastful claim, and then he delivers the punchline by invoking his mother gleefully every time, as if it's the funniest thing anyone has ever said. The first time, you blink at it. By the 10th time, it's somehow funnier precisely because he refuses to retire it, because he believes in it completely, because no amount of groaning from the people around him will ever convince him that the joke has run its course. That's Muscle Man in miniature. Total commitment to a bit that everyone else has long since tired of, and a sincere, almost touching belief that he is killing it. He takes off his shirt at the slightest excuse, he swings it over his head, he throws himself into the dumbest dares with the confidence of a man who has never once been embarrassed in his life, even though he should be embarrassed roughly constantly. And there's a strange charisma in that, in the sheer unkillable self-belief of the guy, even when the self-belief is wildly unearned. And I have to tell you his real name, because it's one of those tiny perfect touches. Muscle Man's real name is Mitch Sorenstein. Mitch. There's something so funny and so human about that, this larger-than-life green prankster who introduces himself like he's a legend, and underneath it all, he's just a guy named Mitch. The show loves doing this, you've probably noticed by now, giving its most cartoonish characters these grounded, ordinary, slightly sad real names. Benson Dunwoody. Mitch Sorenstein? It's a recurring little move, and it works every time. This collision between the absurd surface and the plain mortal name underneath. But you genuinely can't talk about Muscle Man without talking about the other half of him, because the two are inseparable, and that's the whole point of them. High Five Ghost. He's a small ghost character, another co-worker, this little floating spirit with a single hand raised up over where the top of his head would be, permanently ready, as the name promises, for a high five. And he and Muscle Man are a unit, a pair, a double act. Where one goes, the other floats along beside him, and the running gesture between them, the thing that defines their friendship, is exactly what you'd guess, the high five, delivered constantly, triumphantly as punctuation on every dumb plan and every successful prank. Now here's a little behind-the-scenes wrinkle that I find quietly charming. High Five Ghost is voiced by J.G. Quintel, who is the creator of the entire show, the guy who dreamed all of this up in the first place. So the man who built this universe gave himself one of the smallest, sweetest little roles in it, this gentle floating sidekick. Though if you go all the way back to the very first season, the voice was a little different, because High Five Ghost was actually voiced by Jeff Bennett in season 1, and then Quintel took over from season 2 onward. It's the kind of early days seam you only notice if someone points it out, the show finding its footing, settling into the voices it would keep. And what I love about Muscle Man and High Five Ghost as a pair is that their bond is real. It would be easy to play them purely as comic relief, the two clowns who exist to be gross and get in the way. And sure, a lot of the time that's the job, but the friendship underneath it is genuine. High Five Ghost is loyal to Muscle Man in a way that's almost touching, sticking by this loud, ridiculous guy through every embarrassing scheme, and Muscle Man, for all his bluster, clearly needs that loyalty, clearly leans on it. They're a little portrait of friendship at its most unconditional. One of them is frankly a lot to put up with. The other one just keeps showing up with his hand raised, ready. There's something sweet in that. There's something sweet in the guy who stays. Let me step back and look at the whole crew together for a moment, because I think the way they're built tells you something about how the show works. Pop skips Muscle Man, High Five Ghost. Innocence, wisdom, crudeness, loyalty. What this suggests, the way I read it, is that each one of them is a single clear note. The show didn't try to make every character a complicated bundle of contradictions out of the gate. It gave each of them one pure, instantly readable quality, one strong color, and then it let them stand next to each other. And once you have notes that clean, you can build any chord you want. You can play innocence against crudeness for comedy. You can play wisdom against panic for tension. You can stack loyalty next to selfishness and let the contrast do the work. The clarity of each character is exactly what gives the show its range. Simple parts, endless combinations. And the more I think about it, the smarter that choice looks. A lot of shows make the mistake of front-loading complexity, of trying to convince you in the first episode that every single character contains multitudes, and the result is usually a fog, a cast of mushy people who all kind of blur together because none of them stands for anything in particular. Regular show goes the other way. It trusts the simple, strong outline. You can describe each of these characters in one word to someone who's never watched, and they'd recognize them instantly the moment they showed up on screen. The sweet one, the wise one, the gross one, the loyal one. That legibility is a feature, not a shortcut. It means the show can throw these four into any situation, in any combination, and you'll immediately understand the comedy of the pairing, because you know exactly what each of them wants and exactly how each of them sees the world. Think about how much that opens up. Put Pops and Muscle Man in a scene, and you've got innocence colliding with crudeness, the gentlest soul in the park standing politely next to the grossest, and the joke writes itself. Put Skips next to the panicking guys, and you've got calm against chaos, the steady center holding while everyone spins. Put loyal little High Five Ghost beside selfishness or cowardice, and his steadiness suddenly reads as quiet heroism. You can run these characters through endless permutations and never exhaust them, because each one is a fixed point, a known quantity, and comedy, real comedy, lives in the friction between known quantities. The show built itself a set of instruments, tuned each one to a single clear pitch, and then spent 8 years discovering how many different songs it could play. And, crucially, because each note is so clean to begin with, there's enormous room to bend it later, to add a flattened, sorrowful tone to the wise one, a hidden depth to the gross one, and have it land like a genuine surprise rather than a contradiction. And it's that very simplicity, that clean first impression, that makes the deeper turns hit so hard later. Because the show sets each of them up as one easy thing, and then, slowly, across years, it complicates them. The crude guy turns out to have real feelings. The loyal sidekick turns out to have a whole inner life. And the two I keep circling back to, the two I want to leave you thinking about as this part winds down, are Skips and Pops, because they're the ones the show is most quietly lying to you about in the beginning. I already planted the seed on Skips, so let me water it once more and add the second one. Skips, the immortal Yeti who fixes everything, is hiding a long and sorrowful past, and the calm he wears every day is the calm of someone who has lived through far too much to be rattled by a monster in the park. That's coming. But Pops, sweet, innocent, lollipop-headed Pops, the one who seems only good in the world, the one who seems like the simplest, safest, most harmless character in the entire show. Pops is not what he seems either. I'm going to leave that there, deliberately, just like that, because I don't want to spoil the shape of it. But I'll tell you this much. The character you'd least suspect of carrying the weight of the universe is exactly the character you should be watching most closely. The show hides its biggest secret behind its softest face. Keep that somewhere in the back of your mind. The gentle ones are gentle for a reason, and sometimes the reason is enormous. And here's a small thread that's worth keeping in your fingers as we go, because it tugs gently on that same mystery. I told you Pops owns the park. That's true, as far as it goes. But he isn't actually the top of the chain. The true owner of the park is a man named Mr. Maillard, and Mr. Maillard, it turns out, is Pops' father. He's voiced by David Ogden Stiers, and he's this stern, distant, businesslike figure about as far from his son's sunny innocence as you can imagine. Which raises a quiet question the early episodes never bother to answer. How does a man like that come to have a son like Pops? What is the story there? Why is the gentlest creature in the show the child of this severe, formal old businessman? The show doesn't make a big deal of it at first. It just lets it sit, this odd little family arrangement, the way it lets so many things sit. But it's part of the same puzzle, part of the slow drip of the question of what Pops actually is and where he actually comes from. So tuck Mr. Maillard away with the rest of it. The father and the son, the severe one and the sweet one. There's more to that than the early going lets on. I keep coming back to this idea, and I want to say it plainly before we move on, because I think it's the heart of why this crew works. The show hides its depths under its surfaces, deliberately, and it trusts you to be patient. It introduces a gentle old man and lets you underestimate him. It introduces a calm handyman and lets you take his calm for granted. It introduces a loud clown and a floating sidekick and dares you to write them off as filler. And every one of those first impressions is a setup. The payoff is years away, and the show is fine with that because it knows that the slow reveal, the thing you didn't see coming because it was hiding in plain sight the whole time, lands so much harder than anything it could have rushed. That's the contract this show makes with you. Give it time and it will turn every one of these simple faces into someone you'll ache for. There's one more thing I have to point out before we move on, and it's the kind of detail that once you know it, you start hearing the whole show a little differently. Remember Benson, the gumball machine boss. Remember Pops, this delicate childlike innocent. And remember Muscle Man, the loud, crude green prankster. Three characters who could not possibly be more different. The grumpy authority figure, the pure-hearted gentle soul, the gross attention-seeking clown, and every one of those three voices comes out of the same man. Sam Marin plays Benson and Pops and Muscle Man. Three completely different souls, three completely different registers, all living inside one performer. The angry one, the innocent one, and the crude one. All the same throat, all the same set of vocal cords, stretching themselves into three people who would never ever be mistaken for each other. I think that's genuinely remarkable, the range of it, and it's the sort of thing that makes you appreciate how much of this surreal little world was conjured by a very small number of people doing a very large amount of work. Which, honestly, is the perfect thing to start wondering about next, because once you start asking how a handful of voices could carry an entire universe, the natural next question is how this whole strange thing got built in the first place. With paper and pencils and a team across the ocean and a project that, by the sound of it, had almost no rules at all. To understand why this little world feels so real, why the park and the crew and the friendship all sit so solidly in your chest, I have to step outside it for a moment. I have to leave the cartoon entirely and walk back through a side door into the actual world, the one with deadlines and rent and people, and tell you about where all of this actually came from. Because none of it fell out of the sky. Somebody made it. One person, mostly, at the start. And the story of how a guy ended up drawing a blue jay and a raccoon for a living is, I think, its own quiet little bedtime story, the kind worth telling slowly while you're lying there in the dark. So let me tell it like that. Once, not so very long ago, there was a young man who liked to draw. Picture him the way you'd picture anyone at that age, somewhere in his early 20s, somewhere in school, in that strange, hopeful, blurry stretch of life where you're old enough to have real talent and too young to have any idea what to do with it. His name is G. Quintel, And years before there was a Cartoon Network show, before there was a Park or a Benson or a single rake left unused, he was just a student making short films. Little hand-built things. The kind of work you do not because anyone's paying you, but because something in you needs to get out. Needs to be drawn, needs to exist on a screen even if the only audience is a classroom and your own tired eyes at 3 a.m. And here's the part that gets me, the part I keep turning over. The whole enormous thing you've been lying here listening to, the immortality and the grief and the gentleman who eventually dies to save everything, all of it traces back to those student films. 2 of them especially. One was called The Navvy Man from Lowlyland, made in 2005. The other was called 2 in the AM/PM, made in 2006. And those 2 little movies, those scrappy student projects, are where the characters we love first started to take shape. Not fully, not with their names and their jobs and their whole lives attached yet, but the seeds, the voices, the feeling of them. The DNA of Regular Show is sitting right there in the work of a film student who didn't yet know what he was building. I want to slow down on that first title for a second, because it's going to matter more than it looks. The Nane Man from Lollyland. Hold that word, Lollyland. Tuck it somewhere safe in the back of your mind, because we are going to come back to it, and when we do, it's going to do something to you. For now, just know that this little film, this student project, with the funny name, actually won something. It took a prize at the 2005 Nicktoons Film Festival, which means that even then, even before any network had taken a chance on him, the work was landing. People were watching this young man's strange, gentle little cartoons and feeling something enough to hand him an award for it. The talent was already there, already visible, already getting noticed by the kind of people who notice these things. He just needed a door to open. And here's where the bedtime story takes its lucky turn. The turn that, honestly, every story like this needs and most of them never get. Because the thing about pitching a cartoon to a big network is that the network usually wants to change it. That's the normal way of things. You walk in with this weird, tender, personal thing you made, and somewhere in a room full of people with opinions, the weird gets sanded off. The tender gets focus grouped, the personal gets turned into a product, smoothed down into whatever shape they think will sell to the most kids on a Tuesday afternoon. That's the machine. That's what usually happens to the strange, beautiful things before they ever reach you. But Regular Show didn't go through that machine, not at the start. It was pitched to a project at Cartoon Network called Cartoonstitute, and the whole point of Cartoonstitute, the entire beautiful idea of it, was creative freedom, no network interference. No executives leaning over the shoulder going, what if the raccoon were more marketable? What if the gumball machine smiled more? What if the whole thing were a little less odd and a little more like everything else? None of that. Just, here, make your thing, make the thing you actually want to make, and let's see what comes out. Let me sit with that for a second because I think it explains almost everything about why the show feels the way it feels. Read this way, the strangeness of Regular Show isn't a flaw the network tolerated. It's the whole reason it exists. The freedom of that Cartoonstitute project is why the show could be this weird, this specific, this unbothered by formula. There was no executive in the room shaping it towards some safe, predictable shape, and you can feel that absence in every frame. You can feel that nobody was telling Quintel to explain why the boss is a gumball machine, or to soften the dead-end job melancholy, or to make the 2 leads younger and cuter and less like actual exhausted adults. The weirdness got to stay because nobody with a spreadsheet was paid to remove it. That to me is the quiet miracle at the root of the whole thing. The show is strange because, for once, somebody let it be. Okay, so that's the spark, the lucky open door. Now let me tell you about the work itself, the actual making of the thing, because this is the part I find almost unbearably lovely, and it's the part almost nobody thinks about when they're laughing at 2 cartoon idiots. Most of what you watch on television now, most animation, is made digitally. Drawn on computers, colored on computers, moved around on computers. It's faster, it's cheaper, and there's nothing wrong with it. Plenty of gorgeous things get made that way. But Regular Show didn't do that. Regular Show was drawn by hand, on paper. The traditional way, the old way, the way that takes actual human hands holding actual pencils, frame after frame after frame. Somebody sat down and drew Mordecai's slouch. Somebody drew the exact curve of Rigby's striped tail dragging behind him. Not clicked it, not generated it. Drew it. By hand. On paper you could hold. And I have to stop here for one honest second, because there's something about that that hits me right in the chest. In a world that was already racing toward the fast and the digital and the automated, a bunch of people chose the slow way. The hard way, the way with smudges and erasers and hand cramps. They chose to make this goofy little show about slackers the patient, painstaking, deeply human way. There's a kind of love in that choice that you can't fake. Okay, let me get back to how it all actually came together, because the paper was only the first leg of a very long journey. Here's the trip each episode took, and it's wild once you lay it out. The drawings, those handmade paper drawings, didn't just stay in one building and become a cartoon. They got packed up and sent across the entire ocean. The animation assets traveled all the way to a studio in South Korea, a place called Seorom Animation, where the production work happened, where all those drawings got turned into actual moving animation. And then, once that was done, the whole thing made the trip back across the world to California, to a place called Saber Media Studios, where it all got pulled together for the final mixing, the sound and the music and the polish, the last layer that makes a cartoon feel finished. Think about that path for a moment, drawn by hand on one continent, animated on another, brought home to a third place to be mixed, and finished. A single episode of this silly, beautiful show literally circled a good chunk of the planet before it reached your screen. And all of that, the drawing and the shipping and the animating and the shipping back and the mixing, all of that took time. Real time. About 9 months. 9 months per episode. That's the same amount of time it takes to grow a person from nothing. 9 months of careful, distributed, around-the-world labor for one episode of a cartoon you might have watched in 11 minutes and forgotten you'd seen. I keep coming back to that number because of what it does to how I see the show. 11 minutes of slackers refusing to rake leaves. And behind it, 9 months of people on opposite sides of the earth doing meticulous, unglamorous, genuinely difficult work to bring it to you. There's a joke buried in there so perfect I don't think they could have planned it. A show about two guys who will do anything to avoid work, made by an army of people doing an absurd amount of work. The slow way, the hard way, the way that crosses oceans. The laziest characters on television brought to life by some of the least lazy labor imaginable. And there's one more piece of how it was made that I have to tell you because it's small and it's specific, and it's the thing that, more than almost anything else, explains why the show sounds the way it sounds. The voices. The actual voices in your ear, the way Mordecai and Rigby talk to each other. The people who voiced these characters didn't record their lines alone. That's the thing. In a lot of animation, the actors come in one at a time, separately, on different days even, and each one reads their part into a microphone in an empty booth, talking to nobody, just a script and a silence, and then an editor stitches all those lonely separate recordings together afterward into something that's supposed to sound like a conversation. Regular show didn't do it that way, not for the heart of it. The cast recorded together, in a room, at the same time, actually facing each other, actually talking, actually reacting in real time to what the other person just said. And read this way, that single choice is doing so much of the quiet work, because a conversation recorded as a real conversation sounds like a real conversation, in a way that stitched together solo takes almost never manage. When two people are genuinely in a room together, you get the overlaps. You get the little interruptions, the moment one of them starts laughing before the other one's finished the joke, the half-second hesitations that no script writes on purpose because they only happen when a real human is actually listening to another real human. That texture can't be faked in the edit. It has to be caught live, in the room, with the people right there. And you can hear it. That's the thing. Once somebody tells you the cast recorded together, you can never not hear it again. The reason Mordecai and Rigby sound less like characters reading dialogue and more like two friends you're eavesdropping on at the next table over, the reason their rhythm feels so worn in and so easy is that, on some real level, that's exactly what was happening. Two people in a room, riffing, the way actual friends do. The realness wasn't only written into them, it was performed into them, live, by people sharing the same air. So let me gather all of this up because I think it adds up to something, and I think it's the whole reason I dragged you out of the cartoon for a few minutes to begin with. A young man's student films, made for the love of it, made strange and gentle and personal. A rare lucky door, a project that handed him real freedom and let the weirdness live instead of sanding it off. Drawings made by hand, on paper, the slow human way. A production that circled the globe and took 9 months an episode. A cast that sat in a room together so the friendship would sound like a friendship. Pile all of that up and you start to understand why this show doesn't feel manufactured. It feels lived in. It feels made, not assembled by a committee chasing a trend, but built carefully by people who clearly cared, the long way around, with their actual hands and their actual voices. That's the difference you've been feeling this whole time without having words for it. The warmth in the park, the realness in the friendship, the sense that this place existed before you got there and would go on existing after you left, none of that is an accident. It's the residue of how it was made. you can't fake lived in. You have to live in it, and so did they, 9 months at a time, ocean to ocean, pencil by pencil. Oh, and one last thing before I let this thread go, because it's the kind of detail that should keep you up at night in the best way, that student film. The one with the funny name, The Neve Man from Lollyland. Lollyland. Years later, when this show reaches its very end, when it goes to the place it's been quietly building toward the whole time, the name of Pops' home planet, the world at the center of the entire finale, is Lollyland, the same word. The very first thing this man ever made was already carrying the name of the last thing he'd ever do with these characters. Meaning the ending, the whole devastating cosmic ending, was hiding in plain sight inside a student film from 2005, before anyone, maybe even him, knew where any of it was going. Hold that one gently, you're going to want it later. For now, just sit with the strangeness of it, a whole ending folded up inside a beginning, waiting years to open. And it did open eventually in a big way, because once this carefully made little show actually reached the world did not stay quiet about it for long. And almost the moment it arrived, people noticed in numbers big enough to let the show become whatever it wanted. That's the part I always want to sit with for a second, because we spent the last little while down in the weeds of how this thing got built. All that paper and ink, all those animators in Korea drawing a blue jay and a raccoon frame by frame, a project with basically no rulebook. And the lovely thing about a story like that is when it actually works, you can do all the careful, strange, lovingly handmade labor in the world and still watch it land with a thud. This one didn't land with a thud. This one landed and stuck. So let me just stay in the regular world for a minute, the real one, the one with ratings charts and overnight numbers. Because there's a quiet satisfaction in a success story, and I think we've earned a small victory lap before things get heavy again. Because they do get heavy later, you and I both know that. There's grief coming, there's a gentle man and a terrible price coming. But not yet. Right now, it's just a show finding its audience faster than anyone had a right to expect. The premiere did the thing you dream about, and almost never get. More than 2 million people watched it. The exact figure floating around is just over 2 million for that first episode. And it didn't just do nicely, it immediately topped its time slot. Right out of the gate, no slow build, no praying for word of mouth to save it over a few months. The first night out, this little cartoon about 2 park employees who'd rather do anything than rake leaves was the most watched thing in its hour among the audience it was chasing. According to Nielsen, the one that tracks all of this, the first and second seasons ranked number 1 in their time slot among every key boy demographic across all of television, not all of cartoons. All of television, that still gets me a little, honestly, because of how unassuming the whole thing looks from the outside. 2 slackers, a park, some leaves. Number 1. And here's the part that turns a fluke into a fact. Season 2 held it. The second season premiere pulled almost exactly the same audience as the first, right around the 2 million mark again, barely a flicker of difference between them. That matters more than the big premiere number if you ask me, because anybody can have one good night. A new show is shiny, people are curious, they tune in to see what the fuss is. The real test is whether they come back and whether they bring the same crowd with them a whole year later. They did. Same neighborhood of viewers, same top of the slot. That's not luck anymore. That's a real audience that decided this park was somewhere they wanted to keep hanging around. If you're the kind of person who likes following a story like this all the way through, the whole rise and the weird turns and the heartbreak still ahead of us, this is the gentlest possible moment for me to say it would genuinely mean a lot if you stuck around for the rest. That's all, back to it. Because the numbers were only half of it. The critics were already in too, and early. From the start, the people whose job it is to be hard to please kept landing on the same handful of words. They praised the snappy dialogue. They praised the odd characters. They praised the clever little stories. And I love that those were the things that got noticed first, because those are exactly the things you'd worry a mainstream review would miss on a show this strange. You could imagine somebody writing it off as just another loud cartoon for kids, all sugar and noise. Instead, they clocked the writing. They clocked the rhythm of how these characters talk to each other, the way an argument about almost nothing could be funnier and sharper than it had any business being. They saw the weirdness, and they read it as a feature, not a bug. And then the recognition got formal, and fast. This is the bit I find quietly telling. In that very first season, one of the episodes got nominated for an Emmy. A band episode of all things, the one where the 2 leads start a band and let it go straight to their heads. On paper, it's a goofy rivalry plot, the kind of thing you'd never expect anyone in a suit to take seriously. And it landed an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program at the Creative Arts Ceremony in the show's first year out of the gate. First season, goofy band episode, Emmy nomination. I just think those 3 things sitting next to each other tell you something. Read this way, that nomination feels like more than a nice trophy moment, it feels like an early signal. Because the Academy didn't have to notice a first-season cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon starting a band. There were plenty of safer, more obvious shows to point at. The fact that they singled out this one this early suggests some of the people watching closely already sensed there was something underneath the goofing around. Something they couldn't quite name yet, but could feel. A weight under the comedy. A heart under the slacker shrug. They were responding to it before the show had even shown its full hand, before any of the big emotional swings we're going to talk about later had happened. The instinct was there in the room early. Somebody felt it. And this, to me, is the most important thing about this whole sunny little chapter, the reason I wanted to slow down and actually enjoy the win instead of rushing past it. The success bought freedom. That's what early popularity does for a show, if it's lucky and the people in charge are smart about it. When you come out of the gate as the number one thing in your slot, when the critics are already on your side and the awards people are already nodding, the network stops hovering. They stop second guessing. They give you room. And the way I read it, that room is exactly what let this show slowly become the strange, sad, enormous thing it eventually turned into. Popularity bought it the runway to get weirder. The implication, the thing this whole success story quietly sets up, is that the freedom to break your heart later was paid for right here, in these early ratings and these early reviews. You earn the right to go cosmic by first proving you can hold an audience. They held one, so they got to go anywhere. And the audience didn't shrink as it got stranger, which is the part that always reassures me. It grew. At its peak, a few years into the run, the show was pulling almost 2.5 million people a week. Think about that for a second. It got weirder, it got sadder, it started telling stories about time and loss and impossible stakes, and more people showed up, not fewer. The trust held even as the ambition climbed. That's a rare thing. Most shows that get stranger lose people doing it. This one took the goodwill it banked early and spent it on getting braver, and the audience came along for every step. But all of that, the bravery and the heartbreak and the cosmic swings, all of it was still ahead. Before this show could be about immortality and grief and a gentle man dying to save everything, it had to be about much smaller things first. Raking leaves, a vending machine, a bad attitude on a slow afternoon. So let's go back to the very beginning of the run and look at those first 2 seasons, the small, almost humble stories that quietly laid every brick of the world all the big stuff would later stand on. So, with the whole cast finally standing in place, the Blue Jay and the Raccoon and the Gumball Machine Boss and the Yeti and the Ghost and the Lollipop Man, let me walk you back inside the show itself and move slowly through the early years. The small ones, the strange little stories that, almost without anyone noticing at the time, quietly laid down every single rule this show would later spend years gleefully breaking. Because that's the thing about a beginning. You can only see what it was setting up once you know where it all ended. And we're going to take this part gently, like flipping through an old photo album late at night. No rush, just landing on one episode at a time and sitting with it for a moment before drifting to the next. And I want to be upfront about the spirit of this stretch because it's a particular kind of pleasure and I don't want you to expect the wrong thing. This isn't the heartbreak part. We're not at grief yet, not at immortality, not at the part where a gentleman pays a terrible price for the rest of them. That's all coming, and you know it's coming. And honestly, part of why I love revisiting these early episodes is that I know what's waiting at the far end of the road, and they don't. There's a sweetness to that. Watching a show be small and silly when you already know how enormous and how sad it's eventually going to let itself become. So treat this like a slow walk through a quiet neighborhood you'll later see leveled and rebuilt into something vast. Right now, the houses are still small. The leaves are still just leaves. Let's stroll. Let me set the ground first, the plain shape of it, so the rest has somewhere to stand. The very first episode aired on the 6th of September, 2010. Season 1, Episode 1, and the whole first season was a short one, only 12 episodes. The kind of tight little run a network hands a new show when it wants to test the water without betting the house. 12 episodes that started in early September and wrapped by the 22nd of November that same year. So the entire first season of this thing fits inside about 2.5 months. A single autumn, which feels almost too fitting for a show about 2 guys whose entire job is failing to rake the leaves off a lawn. And then, almost without a pause to catch its breath, the second season started up just a week after the first one ended, on the 29th of November, 2010. That one was a much bigger animal. 28 episodes, running all the way from the tail end of 2010 through to the 1st of August, 2011. So when you put those 2 seasons side by side, you get this lovely lopsided shape. A cautious little 12-episode toe in the water, and then this big confident plunge of 28. The water was fine, it turns out. They jumped. And I do want you to feel that gap, that single week between the end of one season and the start of the next, because it tells you something about the moment the show was living through. Most shows finish a season and vanish for the better part of a year. You wait, you wonder if it's even coming back. But this one wraps up its first run in late November and is back on the air with a brand new and much longer second season before the month is even out. That's not how a show coasts. That's how a show that the network suddenly believes in gets rushed back out the door, riding a wave, while people still have it fresh in their heads. So picture it from the outside. November 2010, you're watching a finale, and a handful of days later, there's simply more of it. A whole second and bigger season unfurling in front of you, like the people in charge couldn't wait to keep going. There's a kind of confidence baked right into that calendar. Now let me actually take you inside the first one, because everything starts here, and I genuinely think it's the most important 20-something minutes in the whole run, for understanding what this show secretly is. The very first episode is called The Power, and it does something almost cheeky in hindsight. It establishes the entire template forever, on day one before the show could possibly have known how far that template would eventually carry it. Here's how it goes. Our two leads come into possession of a magical keyboard. A keyboard. The kind of thing a kid might mess around with in a music shop. Plastic keys, the sort of toy you'd expect to play a tinny preset drum beat and nothing more. Except this one, when you play a certain little riff on it and speak a wish out loud, grants the wish. Real magic, no explanation, no origin story, no wizard handing it over with a warning, no ancient prophecy, no glowing runes. It just is magic, sitting there in their ordinary world like it's the most normal thing in the world. Nobody in the episode treats it as impossible, which is itself a quiet little signal about how this whole universe is going to operate. The strange doesn't announce itself here. It just shows up and gets used. And what do they wish for, these two? This is the part I always grin at. Not riches, not fame, not power in the grand sense, not to rule anything. They wish for a sandwich made of grilled cheese, basically. The most gloriously low-stakes desire two bored young guys could possibly summon infinite cosmic power to fulfill. Hold that image in your head for a second, because it's almost perfect. A device that could presumably reshape reality, and the first instinct is lunch. That's the whole soul of these two characters in one gag. And of course it spirals. Of course the wishing gets out of hand, because it always does, and the magic turns on them, and what started as a goof becomes a genuine threat. The world starts bending and warping around two people who only ever wanted to mess around and avoid doing their actual jobs. Reality itself begins to buckle under the weight of their boredom. And they have to dig themselves out of a hole that they, specifically with their own laziness, dug. And I have to stop here just for a second, because the more I think about that setup, the more it floors me as a thesis statement. Read this way, that first episode isn't really about a keyboard at all. The show implies, right from the opening minutes, that the supernatural in this world doesn't arrive through some chosen one or some grand quest. It arrives through laziness. Through ordinary slacker wanting, two guys would rather not work, they'd rather have a snack and goof off. And that ordinary want is the exact door the impossible walks through. What this suggests, and it suggests it before the show has earned the right to suggest anything, is a pattern that's going to scale up and up and up. The wants stay small and human all the way through. A day off, a free thing, a good time, but the forces those wants summon get bigger every season, until by the end you've got these same two guys with these same small desires standing in front of actual gods. The first episode is that whole arc in miniature, laziness summoning something larger than itself. They just didn't know yet how larger would get. Snap back to the ground though, because I don't want to oversell the early run as some grim seed of doom. It mostly wasn't. Mostly it was just funny and weird and warm and a little unhinged in the most charming way. Let me give you a feel for the texture of these first standalone stories without drowning you in them, because honestly the joy of this era is in the texture more than in any one plot. The week after the keyboard, on the 13th of September, 2010, you get an episode called Just Set Up the Chairs, and the title tells you everything about the show's whole comic engine, honestly. Say it out loud, just set up the chairs, and you can already hear the exasperation in it. That flat, tired sound of a boss who knows these two and knows exactly how this will go. The boss gives them one task, the simplest, most boring, most achievable chore on earth. Set up the chairs for an event, that's it. Carry chairs, arrange chairs, done. And naturally that tiny errand becomes a catastrophe, because in this world the gap between a small chore and total disaster is paper thin and always tearing. The core is never just the chore. The chore is a trapdoor. A week after that, the 20th of September, there's caffeinated concert tickets. where the engine driving the chaos is, of all things, the desperate need to score tickets to a show. And the lengths two tired guys will go to, the sheer escalating commitment they'll pour into something this trivial, fueled by frankly irresponsible amounts of caffeine to get something they want for a single fun night. There's something so recognizable in that, isn't there? We've all decided one night out matters more than it sensibly should and then bent our whole week around making it happen. The show just takes that ordinary feeling and lets it run off a cliff. And then a week on from that, the 27th of September, comes Death Punchies, which leans into the show's pure cartoon side, the loud, exaggerated, anything goes part of its personality. A whole episode built around a hand-to-hand fighting craze, this martial arts obsession that takes over the way these obsessions always take over in this park, completely, immediately, with no sense of proportion at all. One of them gets hooked on the idea of being unbeatable in a fight, and like everything else here, it gets dangerously, absurdly out of control. The want is so simple. Be the tough guy. Win. And the consequences come barreling in way out of scale with the want, which by now, 3 episodes in, you're starting to realize is just the law of physics in this place. And just sit with that little trio for a second, because laid out in a row, they're almost a quiet argument all on their own. Chairs, tickets, winning a fight. Read this way. Those 3 early episodes are the same thesis statement again, just dressed in different clothes. The ordinary wants, the doors. The desire to finish a core, the desire for a free, fun night out, the desire to be the toughest guy in the room. Tiny, relatable, deeply human things. And every single one of them becomes the doorway the strange and the dangerous come pouring through. The show keeps telling you, gently, episode after episode, that the supernatural here isn't separate from regular life. It's hiding inside the most regular wants you have. You reach for a small comfort, and something enormous reaches back. I want to pause the tour for just one breath, because this is the kindest spot in the whole passage to say it, right here in the warm part. Before things get big, if you're the sort of person who genuinely loves watching a show get taken apart slowly and carefully like this, the way a friend would do it for you, it would honestly make my night if you decided to stick around for the rest of it. No pressure, no big speech. Just, if this is your kind of thing, I'd love the company for the back half. Okay, back to the park. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression these early episodes were nothing but goofy little chore disasters, because the first season actually had a real high point waiting at the very end of it. The season 1 finale, it aired on the 22nd of November 2010, the last of those 12 episodes, and it's called Mordecai and the Rigby's. And this is the one where the 2 leads briefly become rock stars. Let me paint it a little, because it's a great example of the show finding a bigger gear. Our 2 guys start a band. Just a couple of park employees with instruments and an attitude, and absolutely no business being good at any of this. And the joke, the lovely escalating joke of the whole thing, is that they actually catch a wave of fame. They taste it, the crowd, the noise, the rush of people wanting them, the sudden intoxicating feeling of being somebody after a lifetime of being the 2 guys who can't even rake the leaves off a single lawn. Imagine that for them. The 2 perpetual nobodies of the park, the screw-ups, the ones always one bad afternoon away from getting yelled at, suddenly with people cheering their names. You can understand why it would go to their heads. You'd understand it in anyone. And of course, it does go straight to their heads, because of course it does. And the whole thing twists into a rivalry. Not a polite disagreement, either. A real one. The kind of bitter falling out that only happens between people who are actually close, where the closeness is exactly what gives the fight its teeth. You can only wound somebody like that if they already matter to you. And here's where I think the show quietly tips its hand about what it's really going to be about underneath all the magic and the noise. It's still funny in this episode, still cartoonish and loud and absurd, but there's a real pulse of feeling running under it. An ache about ambition, about ego, about what a sudden taste of success can do to 2 people who've only ever had each other. That's a half step deeper than chairs and concert tickets. That's the show admitting, even this early, that the friendship at its center is the thing it actually cares about, and that it's willing to put that friendship under real strain to make you feel it. And here's the part that makes that finale matter beyond the laughs. Mordecai and the Rigby's is the episode that earned the show its Emmy nod. The very first season, this goofy little band episode, the season 1 closer, got nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program. And I find that genuinely moving in a quiet way. Because think about what that means. The people whose entire job is judging this stuff looked at a first-year cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon starting a garage band, and instead of waving it off as kid noise, they pointed at it. They singled it out. What this suggests to me, and I'll mark it clearly as my reading and not a fact, is that some of the sharpest watchers in the room already sensed there was a weight under the comedy this early, a heart under the slacker shrug, even before the show had played any of its big emotional cards. The instinct was there in that first autumn. Somebody in that room felt the something underneath. So that's how season 1 closes. On a high, on a band, a rivalry, and an Emmy nomination, all from 12 little episodes shot out across a single fall. And then, barely a week later, the show comes right back. And this is where I think you can actually feel it relax into its own weirdness, settle into its own skin. Stop being a promising newcomer and start being the thing it was always going to be. The second season opens on the 29th of November, 2010, with an episode called Hello Governor, Season 2, Episode 1. And the title is the whole vibe, really. Say it out loud. It's a British accent, written down, a phrase spelled the way it sounds. Because the menace of this episode, the threat the whole thing is built around, is a toy. Not a monster from another dimension, not a vengeful spirit. Not a magic artifact this time. A toy. Specifically, a baby-style toy that talks in this exaggerated British accent. This little Hello Governor Cockney sing-song. The kind of cheery canned phrase you'd expect to make a small child laugh. And it is, against all reason, absolutely terrifying. That's the joke, and the horror fused into one thing. A cute, babyish, British accented toy turned into a genuine source of dread. The harmless thing made monstrous precisely because it's so harmless looking. And I have to laugh a little here, because there's something so deeply this show about deciding that the scariest thing it could possibly open a season with is a talking baby toy with a funny voice. Of all the threats in the world, they looked at the whole menu and picked that. And I just love it as a season opener because of what it says about where the show's head was at by then. Let me put it plainly, and again, I'll flag this as my reading rather than gospel. Choosing to open your entire second season, your big, confident 28-episode run, with an episode whose villain is a British accented baby toy, that's a show planting a flag. The show implies with that choice that it's done apologizing for being strange. The first season had to prove it could hold an audience, that it could land a chore disaster and a band rivalry and make you care. By the time you reach Hello Governor, the proving is over. They lead with the weird, they open on the absurd horror of a talking toy, and they trust you to come along, because by now they know you will. Read this way, that episode is the sound of a show exhaling and deciding to just be itself. All the way. No more hedging. The strangeness isn't a risk anymore. It's the whole point. And that second season had a long road ahead of it from there. All 28 episodes of it stretching from that talking toy in late November 2010 all the way out to the 1st of August, 2011, where it would eventually wrap on an episode called Karaoke Video. But we don't need to chase all of that down right now. I just wanted you to feel the shape of these first 2 seasons as a single, low, rolling stretch of road. The cautious 12-episode first season, opening on a magic keyboard and a grilled cheese wish, working through chairs and tickets and a fighting craze, and climbing to a band and an Emmy nod. And then the bigger second season, starting almost immediately, leading boldly with a horror toy that says hello in a fake British accent. The show finally comfortable in its own oddness. I should be honest with you about one thing before we move on, because I try not to dress up opinion as fact in these. If you go digging through fan discussions about which of these early episodes matters most to the show's eventual mythology, which one really planted the seed of all the cosmic, time-bending life and death stuff that comes later, you'll find people argue about it endlessly and they do not agree. Nothing official settles it. There's no canonical ranking of the most pivotal early episode handed down from on high. Fans have theorized plenty, and it's a fun argument to have, but nothing official confirms any one episode as the secret key. So whenever I lean toward calling The Power the real Rosetta Stone of the whole series, please hear that as my opinion, and nothing firmer than that. It's a reading I love. It isn't a fact you can carry into an argument and win. But I keep coming back to it anyway, that first episode, because of how completely it set the table. A magical object dropped into an ordinary world. 2 lazy friends using world-bending power to get a snack, the chaos that follows, and the quiet lesson buried in the chaos that the supernatural in this place always enters through the smallest human want. That's the template. The Chairs episode runs it. The Tickets episode runs it. The Fighting episode runs it. The band finale runs it on a bigger stage. The British toy kicks off season 2 by running it with more confidence than ever. Over and over, small want, enormous consequence, the regular and the impossible pressed right up against each other until you can't tell where one ends and the other starts. And what really stays with me, sitting here walking you through all these slight, funny, low-stakes little stories, is how patient the whole thing was. None of these early episodes is shouting about immortality or grief or the fate of the universe. They're about snacks and chores and bands and toys. But the rule that all the enormous stuff would later obey was already written quietly in these first 2 seasons. The show spent its early run teaching you, gently and almost invisibly, how its world worked, so that when it finally turned that same world toward the truly cosmic and the truly heartbreaking, you'd already believe the rules. You'd already know that in this park, the ordinary is exactly where the impossible lives. Which is why, before we follow those rules up toward gods and grief and impossible stakes, we need to stop and really look at the one figure who'd been standing quietly at the edge of all this from the very start, the gumball machine running the whole park. Because Mr. Maillard is the first soft hint that something much bigger was waiting underneath this regular little show all along. There is one more figure standing at the edge of the park, the man who truly owns it, and he is the first thread that when you pull it, quietly unravels the whole secret history of the show. You almost don't notice him at first. He appears now and then, a small old man in a sharp suit, with a thin mustache and a voice that comes down like a ruler on a desk. He is brusque where everyone else is soft. He is impatient where the whole world of this show is built on dawdling. And his name is Mr. Maillard, and he is the one who actually holds the deed to this little patch of grass and snack bar and golf cart and falling leaves. He is the true owner of the park, voiced by David Ogden Stiers, and for a long stretch of episodes, that is all he is. The boss above the boss, a face that shows up to scowl, to demand results, to make Benson sweat, and then to vanish again. But here's the thing you start to feel before you can explain it. There is a gap in this man, a strange, load-bearing gap. Because Pops, the gentle lollipop man, the one with the enormous round head and the candy-colored suit and the laugh like a wind chime, Pops also seems to belong to this park in some deep, settled way. He lives in the big house on the hill. He drifts through the grounds like he was born into them. And slowly, almost shyly, the show lets you in on the connection. Mr. Maillard is Pops's father. The stern little man in the suit is the father of the softest creature in the entire cast. And I have to stop on that for a second, because the first time it lands, it's genuinely funny, and then it's something else entirely. Picture it. This sharp, barking, no-nonsense businessman, and his son is a being made almost entirely of wonder, a man who claps at sunsets and gets overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. That mismatch is a joke, and then it stops being a joke, because the gap matters. Pops owns the park in the way a beloved child owns the house he grew up in, which is to say, emotionally, and not at all on paper. Mr. Maillard owns it the way a father owns the world he built to keep that child safe. And that one quiet distinction, the difference between the son who belongs to the park and the father who truly possesses it, turns out to explain almost everything that comes later. Hold on to it. The whole back half of this story is hiding inside that relationship. This is the pivot. This right here is the place where you can feel the floor of the show tilt. Up to now, we have been talking about a sitcom, leaf blowers and meat sandwiches and arguments over a video game, 2 friends avoiding their chores, and it has been wonderful precisely because it stayed so small. But the moment you really look at Mr. Maillard and his strange, gentle son, the camera, so to speak, starts pulling back, and you realize the small park was never the edge of the map. It was the center of something enormous. We are tipping slowly out of the sitcom and into a mythology. And the man holding the door open is the least mythological figure in the room, a grumpy old businessman in a suit. Let me lean in for this next part, because it's the secret under the secret, and the show takes its time getting here. So I will too. Mr. Maillard did not have a son in the ordinary way. He found one. Long before the park, he worked as a salesman of meteor fragments, which is already a sentence that tells you this show was never going to stay normal. And on one expedition, searching for the rocks he sold, he found something inside a meteor. A baby, an infant sitting in the wreck of a fallen star, and he looked at that small alien face, ancient and round and somehow already old. And he named the child Pops, because the baby's face looked so very old to him. Then he took him home. He adopted the thing he found in the sky, and he raised him. I think about that and I have to sit very still for a moment, because go back now in your mind to every scene of Pops you've already met. The innocence, the way he greets the world like it has never once let him down. We've been reading that innocence as childishness, as the sweet simplicity of a man who never quite grew up. But the show implies something gentler and stranger than that. Read this way: Pops' innocence isn't immaturity at all. It might be the native goodness of a being who is not from here. A purity that came down inside the meteor with him. Not a man who failed to learn how cruel the world can be, but a creature made of somewhere kinder, walking around a park, raking leaves, being patient with 2 lazy young men who have no idea what they're standing next to. That reframes him entirely. Every clap at a sunset becomes the reaction of someone who genuinely cannot believe how beautiful this place is, because where he comes from is the standard he's measuring it against. And there's a second thing tucked into the timeline, and it's the kind of detail you could blink past. The show establishes in an episode from season 3 about skips in a war with technology that Pops has been in Mr. Maillard's care since the early 1900s. The early 1900s, let that settle. The softest, silliest, most childlike figure in the whole show, the one you'd assume knows the least, has quietly been alive for over a century. What this suggests is that Pops is one of the very oldest characters in the entire cast, and he's been hiding that the whole time in plain sight, disguised as the one who understands the least, the fool who is secretly ancient, the child who has watched the world turn for 100 years and chose, somehow, to keep loving it anyway. I find that almost unbearably tender, honestly, and we're not even at the part that hurts yet. And I want to say one thing about the voice, because it matters in a way that reaches out of the screen and into our actual world. Mr. Maillard, that stern little father who found a star child and raised him, was voiced by David Ogden Stiers, and Stiers made his final television appearance as this character in an episode called The Ice Tape before he died in March of 2018. So the man who gave voice to the father, the one who literally found the heart of this show inside a meteor and carried it home, said his last words on television inside this story. There's a quiet weight in that. The actor who played the Keeper of the Secret, signing off here, of all places. So that's the thread. You pull on the grumpy businessman at the edge of the park, and out comes a fallen star. An adoption, another world, a child older than the century, and a father who built an entire life to hold all of it together. The leaf-raking sitcom has a creation myth sleeping underneath it, and it was always going to wake up. We just had to learn to look at the small man in the suit and feel the gap behind him. And once you understand that this is a show willing to hide a whole cosmos inside a gentle old face, you're ready to watch it do something even braver with the people these characters fall in love with. And the slow, careful way it starts letting those feelings actually change them. As the season stacked up, something quietly started growing underneath all the jokes, a real emotional life, and it began with a boy who could not work up the nerve to say how he felt. You can almost feel it happening if you go back and watch in order. The early episodes are pure energy, pure escalation, two friends slacking off and the universe punishing them for it in increasingly enormous ways. But somewhere in the middle of the run, the show starts to slow down in these small moments and let a feeling sit there without rushing to undercut it with a punchline. Not always. The punchline is still coming, almost always. But the show learns this little trick where it lets you ache for a second first. And the place it learns that trick, the place where all of this tenderness first really takes root, is in the most ordinary, most painfully relatable thing imaginable. A blue jay who is completely hopelessly into the girl at the coffee shop and cannot, for the life of him, just say it out loud. Mordecai and Margaret, if you have seen even a little of the show, you know exactly the shape of this because it is the shape of half the crushes anyone has ever had. He goes to the coffee shop, she works at the coffee shop, he orders, he stammers, he says something slightly too eager or slightly too cool, and then he leaves and spends the rest of the day replaying it in his head with Rigby, narrating the whole encounter, dissecting every word, convincing himself that this time there was a moment. And the genuinely lovely and frustrating thing the show does is that it refuses to rush it. This is not a crush that gets resolved in an episode. It runs for years. It becomes one of the longest, slowest will they won't they threads in the whole series, and the show is patient with it in a way that almost feels cruel, because it is patient in exactly the way real life is patient. You wait. You almost say something. You don't. You tell yourself there's always next time. And the seasons keep stacking up. What I love about it, and I mean this as a compliment to the writing, is how unheroic Mordecai is about the whole thing. This is a show that will, in the same half hour, send these characters to literal other dimensions to fight literal gods, and yet the single hardest thing any of them ever attempts is a blue jay trying to tell a robin he likes her. The cosmic stuff is easy by comparison. Punch the monster, scream the magic words, survive. But sitting across from somebody you actually care about and being honest about it with the very real chance they don't feel the same, and you have to keep ordering coffee from them every single day afterward, that is the thing the show treats as genuinely terrifying. And I think that's the point. Read this way, the whole series is quietly arguing that the ordinary fears are the big ones. The supernatural is a metaphor. The actual stakes were always emotional. And the brilliant, slightly evil thing the writers do with this is they let Rigby be Mordecai's accomplice in cowardice, because Rigby is no help at all. Not really. He's a hype man for the crush, not for the honesty. He'll pump Mordecai up, replay the coffee shop encounter with him, agree that yeah, there was definitely a moment, and then the two of them will use up all that energy on the talking and have none left over for the doing. They're two guys who'd rather analyze a feeling for an hour than spend 10 seconds acting on it, which honestly I recognize a little too well, and maybe you do too. The conversation about the thing becomes a way of not doing the thing, and the show is so smart about how it draws that, because it never lectures you about it. It just lets you watch these two grown men talk themselves in circles, and somewhere in there you realize you're watching the most accurate portrait of being 20-something and scared that a cartoon has ever bothered to draw. There's a tenderness in how slow it all is too, because the show could have rushed it. Plenty of shows would have. Get the couple together fast, milk the relationship, move on. Regular show does the opposite. It hoards the longing. It treats every almost moment like it costs something. Because it does. And the longer it draws the crush out, the more it teaches you to read these characters' faces, the small disappointments, the little recoveries, the way Mordecai bounces back from a botched conversation by convincing himself the next one will go better. Season after season, that pattern repeats, and the repetition isn't lazy. It's the whole emotional argument. This is what waiting actually feels like. It feels like doing the same brave then cowardly dance over and over and getting nowhere. And telling yourself it's fine, there's time. There's always more time. Until, of course, there isn't. So it builds. Season after season. Little moments, a glance held a beat too long, a conversation that almost goes somewhere and then doesn't. Mordecai talking himself into and out of it, and the show keeps you on the hook the same way Mordecai keeps himself on the hook, with these flashes of maybe. And then finally, at the very end of the third season, in the finale, in an episode the show simply calls Bad Kiss, it actually happens. They kiss. After all that waiting, all that build, all that stammering at the counter, Mordecai and Margaret share their first kiss. This airs on the 3rd of September, 2012. And if you had been watching from the start, this is the moment. This is the payoff the whole slow burn was building toward. And then the show breaks your heart in the single most regular show way it possibly could. Because the kiss gets cut short, it gets cut short because of Mordecai's bad breath. After all of that, after years of buildup, the romantic high point of the entire series so far gets ruined by the most mundane, most humiliating, most human problem you can imagine. Not a monster, not a villain. Bad breath. And Mordecai, faced with this catastrophe, faced with the absolute mortification of having finally gotten the moment he wanted and fumbling it in the worst way, does what any of these characters do when reality becomes unbearable. He reaches for a sci-fi solution. He gets a time machine and he uses it to go back and undo the kiss. He erases it. He takes it back. Sit with that for a second, because I think it's one of the most quietly perfect things the show ever did. Here is a character who has finally, after years, gotten the thing he has been too scared to even reach for, and the instant it goes slightly wrong, his first instinct is not to laugh it off or try again. It's to make it never have happened. And the show implies something really tender and a little sad in that choice. Undoing a first kiss with a time machine is the entire series in miniature. It uses its big, ridiculous sci-fi toys, the time machines, the portals, the cosmic nonsense, to dramatize an emotion that any 23-year-old on Earth would recognize in a heartbeat. The wish to take an embarrassing moment back, to rewind, to have a do-over on the thing you cannot stop cringing about at 2 a.m. Everybody has wanted a time machine for exactly that reason, just to unsay the thing, to undo the moment. Mordecai actually has one, and he uses it for that, not to win the lottery, not to fight evil, to undo a kiss, because he was embarrassed. That's the show. That's the whole show in one sad, funny choice. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. By erasing the moment, he doesn't fix anything. He just resets the ache. He puts himself right back where he started, back to almost, back to maybe, back to not saying it. The longing doesn't end. It just loops. And honestly, that's such a real way to draw a young person in love and in fear, because the wish to undo your embarrassment and the wish to actually be brave are pulling in opposite directions. And most of the time, the embarrassment wins. Think about what it actually means to have the power to unhappen something. We all daydream about it. The cringe memory surfaces at midnight, the thing you said at the party, the way you waved goodbye to someone who was waving at the person behind you, and some part of your brain goes, if only I could just delete that. Just lift it out of history. Mordecai gets handed that exact wish, fully functional, no strings, and the show lets us see what a person actually does with it when the moment in question is tangled up with someone they love. He doesn't use it to make the kiss better. He doesn't rewind a few seconds and pop a mint and try again. He uses it to make the whole thing vanish, which tells you the embarrassment was louder in that instant than the affection. The shame drowned out the want. And read this way, that's heartbreaking and completely human at the same time, because it means he'd rather have nothing than have something imperfect. He'd rather erase the good part than live with the awkward part. How many people do exactly that with their own lives, just on a slower timescale, no time machine required? And there's a quieter cruelty buried in it, which is that he's the only one who remembers. He resets the moment, but the feeling that made the moment doesn't reset. He still likes her, he's just chosen, with his magic do-over, to pretend the high point never came. So he's carrying the secret memory of a thing that, as far as the timeline is concerned, never occurred. That's such a specific kind of loneliness, isn't it, to be the lone keeper of a moment you yourself decided to delete? The show plays the mechanics of it for comedy, the way it plays almost everything, but if you slow down and really look at the choice underneath, it's one of the saddest things any of these characters does, and they do plenty of sad things before this is over. Some fans have theorized that this whole arc, the slow burn and the undone kiss and what comes after, was a single romantic subplot mapped out years in advance. A deliberate long game rather than something that grew organically episode by episode. I think it's a lovely idea, and I'd half like to believe it, but I should be honest with you, the show's own sources don't confirm any intentional long-term planning like that. It might have been carefully plotted. It might have just grown the way feelings grow, one episode at a time, the writers following the characters rather than a map. Nothing official settles it either way. While I've got you here in the quiet part, if any of this is landing, if you like sitting with a cartoon and pulling on the emotional threads under the jokes like this, it genuinely does help me to know you're out there. So if you want to subscribe and keep these slow, late-night breakdowns coming, I'd really appreciate it. That's it. Back to the coffee shop. Because the romance doesn't stay simple, and this is where the show starts to really complicate Mordecai's heart. There's another character, and she actually shows up earlier than you might expect. Back in the third season, in an episode called Yes Dude Yes, which aired on the 7th of May, 2012. Her name is CJ, and the thing that makes her introduction sting in such a clever way is that she isn't a contrast to Margaret. She's a match. CJ is brought in specifically as a love interest who shares Mordecai's interests. She likes the things he likes. She gets his sense of humor, where so much of the Margaret dynamic is built on Mordecai trying to perform a version of himself that's cooler and smoother than he actually is. CJ is somebody he can just be a goofball around, somebody who's on his wavelength without him having to translate himself first. And that's what turns this from a crush into a genuine ache, because now it isn't a simple question of will he or won't he get the girl. Now there are two people, and they pull on two different parts of him. There's Margaret, the long crush, the years of buildup, the unfinished business, the one he could never quite be honest with. And there's CJ, the easy fit, the one who matches him, the one who doesn't require the performance, a love triangle, drawn slowly with real feeling on every side of it, and no clean villain anywhere in it. Nobody here is wrong. Nobody's the bad guy. They're just three people whose timing keeps missing, and that's so much more painful than a simple rivalry, because you can't even root against anyone. Ugh. I always feel a little wrung out by this stretch, honestly, because the show refuses to make it easy on you. Anyway, what I find so honest about putting CJ in the picture is the kind of tension it creates, because it isn't the tension you usually get in cartoons. It isn't two characters competing for a prize. It's one character realizing slowly and uncomfortably that the person he's pined over for years and the person he actually clicks with might not be the same person. That's a real thing that happens to real people, and it almost never gets dramatized, honestly, because it doesn't have a clean answer. The long crush has all that history behind it, all that built-up meaning, all those years of you wanting it, and history has a gravity of its own. But history isn't the same as fit. Sometimes the person you've wanted forever and the person who's easy to be with are two different doors, and the show makes Mordecai stand in the hallway between them and just feel how hard that is. He's not choosing between good and bad. He's choosing between two goods, and choosing one means losing the other, and there's no version of it where nobody gets hurt. And the show is careful, I think, not to flatten CJ into just an obstacle or a rebound. She's drawn as a whole person with her own footing, somebody who genuinely gets Mordecai in a way that lets him drop the act, and that matters because it raises the stakes of the triangle. If CJ were just a placeholder, you'd know how it had to end, but she isn't. She's a real option, a real connection, and so the ache stays live. You sit there half rooting for both of them and feeling guilty about it, which is exactly the squirmy, no-good answer feeling the writers want you holding. It's love drawn the way love actually is when you're young and a little lost, which is messy and slow and full of people you don't want to disappoint and can't help disappointing anyway. And because this is regular show, and even the tender stuff has to run through the gauntlet of these characters' total inability to act like adults, the romance keeps getting tangled up with their idiot bets and dares. The clearest example lands in the 4th season, in an episode called Do or Diaper, which aired on the 11th of February 2013. Here's the setup. Mordecai makes a bet with Muscle Man. The terms are pure schoolyard. He has to kiss Margaret by Friday at midnight, or he has to wear a diaper for a week. A diaper. That's the stakes. The most emotionally fraught, most genuinely vulnerable thing in this character's whole life, the thing he has been too scared to do for literal years, has now been turned into a humiliating wager with a deadline and a costume penalty attached. And I think that's such a sharp little piece of writing because of what it says about how these guys handle feelings. Mordecai cannot just decide on his own, as a grown adult, to be honest about how he feels. He needs the external pressure, he needs a stupid bet and a ticking clock and the threat of public embarrassment to force his hand, because left to his own devices, he will wait forever. The bet is a crutch. It's a way of outsourcing his own courage to a dare so that if it goes wrong, he can blame the bet instead of his own heart. And the show plays it for laughs. Of course it does. The image of him potentially wearing a diaper for a week is ridiculous on purpose. But underneath the gag, there's this real thing about how hard it is for some people to just claim what they want, how they wrap it in a joke or a bet or a deadline because the joke is safer than the honesty. The diaper is funny. The reason he needs the diaper is kind of sad. That's the balance the show keeps walking. So that's the emotional spine growing thread by thread under all the chaos across the 3rd and 4th seasons. A crush that won't resolve, a first kiss that gets erased, a second love interest who fits him better than he'd like to admit. A love triangle with no villain in it, and it's all happening in a show that on its surface is still about 2 guys avoiding their chores at a park. That contrast is the whole magic of it. The way the most ordinary heartache is unfolding in the same world as the cosmic insanity, treated with the same weight, sometimes more. But the 3rd and 4th seasons aren't just about the heart growing. There's a second thing happening at the same time, and it's structural, and it's a big deal for where this whole story eventually goes. Because right at the start of the 4th season, in the premiere, the show makes a kind of declaration about what it is and what it intends to be. The episode is called Exit 9B, and it aired on the 1st of October, 2012. And here's what it does. It brings back the villains. Not one villain. The villains, it centers on a returning antagonist, Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of a foe the guys had beaten before, and his whole scheme is to revive past villains from previous seasons. So the show reaches back into its own history and pulls forward the enemies these characters had already faced and beaten, and throws them all at the park at once, in a single enormous episode. Everything you thought was finished, everything that had been defeated and filed away, comes flooding back. And let me tell you why that matters so much. Because on the surface, it might just look like a fun greatest hits brawl, a fan service episode where you get to see all the old faces again. But read this way, it's actually a promise. Bringing every old villain back at once is the show making a structural commitment to its audience. It's the writer saying, out loud, in the shape of the story itself, nothing here is disposable. Nothing you've seen is just a one-off you can forget. The past will always return. What happened in Season 1 is still real in Season 4. The continuity is real, and the show is willing to defend it, willing to build a whole premiere around the idea that its own history has weight and consequence. And that is exactly, precisely how the cosmic ending of this whole series eventually works. I won't get ahead of myself, but hold on to this idea, because when we get to the very end, to the part where everything pays off, the way it pays off is by doing this same move on an enormous scale. By having the past return. By treating everything that ever happened as load-bearing. Exit 9 billion is the small version of that promise. The ending is the cosmic version. They rhyme. And the fact that the show planted that flag this early, in a Season 4 premiere, tells you the writers had started thinking about this world as something continuous, something that accumulates rather than a string of disconnected gags you watch and forget. And there's something almost reassuring about that promise, when you sit with it, in the same way it's a little unsettling. Because a world where nothing is disposable is a world where nothing is truly gone, and that cuts both ways. The villains come back, yes, which is a threat. But the principle underneath it, the idea that the past is permanent and everything counts, is also exactly the principle that lets the show eventually do justice to its emotional stuff. If nothing gets thrown away, then the friendships count, the years count, the almost moments at the coffee shop count. A show that's willing to drag its old monsters back into the light is also, quietly, telling you it's the kind of show that won't forget the people you've come to love, that it's keeping a ledger. but everything you've invested is still on the books. The same machinery that brings back the enemies is the machinery that much later refuses to let the friendships just evaporate. I find that genuinely moving, the idea that the continuity is a kind of loyalty or refusal to treat any of it as filler. So Exit 9 Billion is doing double duty. On the surface, it's the loudest, biggest thing the show had attempted up to that point. A wall-to-wall premiere with every old face crammed in. But underneath, it's the show quietly changing its own rules. Before this, you could mostly watch in any order and lose nothing. After this, the order starts to matter, the history starts to matter, and the show is asking you to remember and rewarding you for it. That's the difference between a show you have on and a show you follow. People noticed, too. This premiere was watched by a little over 3 million viewers, 3.047 million to be exact, and that was a real jump up from where the show had been sitting in previous seasons. So this turn toward the bigger, more connected kind of storytelling wasn't happening in a corner. It was happening as the audience was actually growing, as more people were tuning in, which is its own kind of validation for swinging bigger. Some fans read Exit 9 Billion as the deliberate moment the show pivots towards serialized, higher-stakes storytelling, the moment it stops being purely episodic and starts laying track for the eventual space arc and everything that comes with it. And I'll be straight with you the way I always try to be, that reading is interpretation, not confirmed intent. The show doesn't come out and tell us this was a master plan. It might have been a deliberate strategic turn. It might have just been a really fun idea for a premiere that happened to set a tone the writers then leaned into. What's true, what we can actually say, is that the episode exists and it does this thing, it resurrects the past wholesale, and that move turns out to matter enormously later. Whether they knew that when they made it, I can't promise you, but the shape is there. And alongside these two big developments, the heart growing and the continuity hardening, the world of the park is quietly getting more populated too. New faces start filling in around the edges, and they bring their own little threads. In the 4th season, the park gets a new intern, Thomas, a goat brought on to help out around the grounds. And then there's Eileen, who orbits into Rigby's world. Eileen is Margaret's friend, which keeps the social web nice and tangled, everybody connected to everybody, and she starts to become a quiet presence in Rigby's life, the same slow way CJ and Margaret circle Mordecai's. It's worth saying these characters aren't just background filler. The show is building out a little ensemble, a real community around the central friendship, so that when the emotional stakes rise, there are more people to care about and more relationships to put pressure on. Margaret, by the way, is voiced by Janie Haddad, and there's a warmth to that voice that does a lot of the work in making you believe in the crush in the first place, in making her feel like a real person at the counter rather than just a goal Mordecai is chasing. So picture where we are now. The friendship at the center is still the engine. The slacking and the chores and the cosmic punishments are still the surface. But underneath it all, there's this whole emotional ecosystem growing. Mordecai pulled between two people he can't quite be honest with. Rigby with Eileen drifting into his orbit. Thomas wandering in as the new guy. And over all of it, this hardened sense that the world remembers itself now, that the past is permanent, that nothing gets thrown away. The 3rd and 4th seasons are where regular show stops being only a comedy about avoiding work and becomes, without ever fully announcing it, a story with a spine. A story that's keeping track. A story that's quietly preparing to break your heart on purpose later instead of by accident. And once the show knows it can hold real feeling and real continuity, it starts getting bolder with its own shape, stretching into bigger and stranger formats, which is exactly where we're headed next, into the holiday specials and the horror nights, and the episodes where the show pushes the boundaries of what it's even allowed to be. Every so often the show would stop telling small stories and stretch out into a longer special, and those nights were where it secretly practiced for what was coming. Most of the time, the show lived in 11-minute bursts. Two friends mess up a chore, the chore opens a portal to somewhere it has no business opening, a giant fist comes down out of the sky, and by the end, everything's been put back roughly where it started. That tight little engine is the whole reason the show is so easy to fall asleep to. You know the shape. You can let go. But once in a while, it would clear its throat and take a full half hour, and something in its posture changed when it did. It stood up a little straighter, it breathed slower, it got to set up a story, let it sprawl, let it land, instead of sprinting to the finish before the snack you started is even gone. And honestly, those longer ones are some of my favorite things the show ever made, partly because you can feel everyone involved enjoying the extra room. The 11-minute format is a beautiful cage, but it's still a cage. Give these people 30 minutes and they don't just tell a longer version of the same joke. They build something with a middle. They let scenes sit. They let a quiet beat actually be quiet instead of cramming a gag into it. So I want to walk through a handful of those specials, because taken together, they're doing something sneaky. They're teaching the show, episode by episode, how to carry weight over a longer stretch. How to hold your attention past the point where a normal cartoon would have already wrapped up and gone home. Start with the scary ones, because the show absolutely loved being scary. Back in Season 3, there's an episode called Terror Tales of the Park, which aired on the 10th of October in 2011, and it's a full half hour built out of 3 separate horror stories. That's the format. Mordecai and Rigby and the gang sit around and tell tales meant to frighten each other, and the show just runs wild with whatever horror idea it feels like that night. And it kept coming back to that well. Season 5 has Terror Tales of the Park 3, which aired on the 21st of October in 2013. Another half hour, another 3 stories, another excuse to be genuinely unsettling for 22 minutes straight. Here's the thing about those anthology nights, and let me flag this as my read rather than anything the show announced. The anthology let the show be openly scary in a way the format usually hid. Normally, a regular show monster is funny first and frightening second. The horror gets softened, undercut by a joke, kept at arm's length so it never tips the cozy mood over. But inside an anthology, with the framing right there reminding you these are scary stories, the show gets permission to actually commit. It can be dark, it can be cruel, it can let an ending land badly on purpose. And read this way, those Halloween specials were quietly training the audience to accept darkness inside a comfortable cartoon, teaching you that this gentle little show about leaf blowers could go to a genuinely scary place and you'd be okay following it there. Which, if you think about where the show eventually goes, where it ends up asking you to watch a kind, decent character walk toward his own death, is exactly the muscle it needed you to have. You can't drop that on an audience cold. You have to season them for it, year after year, one Halloween at a time. I'll be honest, I find that genuinely clever, the way the spooky episodes are doing emotional homework while pretending they're just here to gross you out. Anyway, back to The Room. Because the show didn't only stretch out to scare you, it stretched out to warm you up too. There's a Thanksgiving special in Season 5, which aired on the 25th of November in 2013, a full half hour about Mordecai and Rigby trying to fix Thanksgiving after it goes sideways, the way absolutely everything they touch eventually goes sideways. And that's the holiday special move in a nutshell. Take the warmest, most sentimental day on the calendar, the one cartoons usually treat with a kind of soft reverence, and then run it straight through the show's chaos engine until the turkey is somehow at stake on a cosmic level. The warmth is real. That's what's interesting about it. The show isn't mocking Thanksgiving. It actually cares that these 2 idiots pull it off. It just refuses to let them have an easy, quiet holiday. Because an easy, quiet holiday isn't a story. You get the same energy at Christmas. In Season 6, there are 2 holiday episodes that aired back-to-back on the 4th of December in 2014, one called The White Elephant Gift Exchange and one called Merry Christmas, Mordecai. 2 of them, side by side, like the show couldn't quite fit everything it wanted to say about the season into a single slot. And again, that's the pattern worth holding on to. The holidays gave the show a reason to slow down and be sincere, to sit in friendship and gratitude in the small ache of another year going by, while still throwing enough chaos at the screen that it never curdled into a greeting card. Warmth and mayhem in the same breath. That balance is hard. Most shows can do one or the other. Regular show kept insisting on both at once, and the longer running time was what gave it the space to actually pull the trick off, instead of just gesturing at it. Then there's my favorite kind of special, the one where the show falls completely in love with another genre and decides to just become it for half an hour. Season 6 has an episode called The Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special, which aired on the 9th of April in 2015, and it's a full-on homage to mecha anime. Giant robots, the whole language of that genre, the dramatic poses, the impossible scale, the deadly serious stakes delivered with a completely straight face. And the show commits. That's the part I love. It doesn't do a quick wink at anime and move on. It builds an actual mecha story because somebody in that writer's room loved mecha anime and wanted to live inside it for an episode, and the show was generous enough to let them. And that, to me, is the secret heart of all these specials, the thing that ties the scary ones and the cozy ones and the giant robot one together. This was a show that would imitate any genre at all, not to be clever about it, but out of pure affection. Horror anthology, holiday warmth, mecha epic, it didn't matter. If the people making it loved a thing, the show would put on that thing's clothes and wear them sincerely for half an hour. There's something deeply likable about that. A show with no genre snobbery in its body. A show that treated every kind of story as something worth playing dress-up in, as long as the love was real. But step back from any single one of these and look at what they're collectively doing. And here's the read I keep landing on. Every time the show stretched to a half hour, it was rehearsing the muscle it would need for a finale that had to carry the weight of the entire universe. Think about it. Each special is a rep. The show is learning how to set up a bigger story and not lose the thread. How to make you sit still for longer, how to build to something instead of just bouncing off it, how to make a half hour feel earned instead of padded. None of that comes for free. A show that only ever told 11-minute stories would have no idea how to land a finale that needs room to breathe, room to grieve, room to say goodbye properly. You can't fake that scale on the day. You build toward it quietly, over years, in specials that look like nothing more than a fun holiday episode or a goofy robot riff. So by the time the show actually needed to tell its biggest, heaviest, most cosmic story, the one this whole thing has been circling, the one where the stakes really are everything, it already knew how. It had practiced. Quietly, while you were laughing at a possessed turkey or a crying robot, it had been getting strong enough to break your heart. That same growing confidence, the willingness to let a story stretch and ache and matter, is exactly what carried the show into its most serious relationship yet, and into the slow, painful way that one came apart. Out of all that pining, all those seasons of Mordecai mooning over someone just out of reach, the show finally turned around and gave him something real. Not a crush, not a longing he carried around like a stone in his pocket. An actual relationship, one that felt healthy and earned and good for him. And that, right there, is exactly why watching it fall apart hurts the way it does. You can ache over a crush, sure, but there's a different, deeper kind of ache reserved for the thing that was actually working, the thing that was genuinely his, slipping out of his hands because of something broken inside him that he never quite finished fixing. And that's the stretch of the show I want to sit in with you now, slowly, because I think it's the most grown-up the whole thing ever lets itself be. So let me settle us into the middle seasons, into the emotional weather of them, because the tone shifts here, and I don't want you to miss the shift. For a long time, the romance in this show ran on one engine, and the engine was wanting. Mordecai wants. Mordecai pines. Mordecai stands in a doorway rehearsing a sentence he will absolutely fail to say. And it was funny, and it was a little sad. And it was very, very young. The kind of love story you have at 20-something where the whole drama is internal. All of it happening on the inside of one nervous person's skull, while the actual other human just goes about their day having no idea. That's where the show lived for years. Picture it if you've drifted off and you can't quite call the scenes up. A coffee shop, a blue jay leaning on a counter, ordering something he doesn't really want, just to have a reason to be there for another minute. A whole conversation he's already had 100 times in his head, and not one word of it making it out into the air. That was the engine. Longing, and the comedy of longing, the way it makes a person stupid and brave and cowardly all in the same afternoon. And then, in the back half, it grows up. It stops being about the agony of wanting someone and starts being about the much harder, much more adult problem of actually having someone and not knowing if you've finished becoming the person who deserves to keep them. That's a real shift. Think about the difference for a second, because it's the whole difference between being young and not being young anymore. When you're young, the scary thing is the asking, the leap. Will they say yes? And you think if you can just clear that one hurdle, you're home. And then you get older and you learn the cruel little secret nobody warns you about, which is that the asking was the easy part and the staying is the mountain. And the thing most likely to wreck the staying isn't some outside force at all. It's whatever you never finished healing on the inside. That's the show maturing in real time. And honestly, I think it matured right alongside the people who'd been watching it since they were teenagers and were now, quietly, not teenagers anymore. The show and the audience aged into the same harder lesson together. And the name at the center of all this is CJ. Let me bring her in properly because she matters and because she'd actually been around longer than people sometimes remember. CJ first showed up back in season 3 in an episode called Yes Dude Yes. Introduced specifically as a love interest, someone built from the start to share Mordecai's interests, to click with him to be a person he could actually talk to rather than a person he could only stare at from across a room. And I want you to hold on to that framing because it tells you something. She wasn't dropped in as an obstacle or a rebound or a one-off gag. She was introduced as a match, somebody on his wavelength, somebody who liked the things he liked and laughed at the things he laughed at, which, if you've ever actually been in love, you know is worth about 1,000 times more than someone simply being beautiful and unattainable. The show planted her early and let her sit in the soil for a while before it really let anything grow. I have to be honest with you about something here, though, because I try not to hand you guesses dressed up as facts in these. If you go looking for the full story of who CJ is, where exactly she comes from, the complete background of her, you're going to hit a wall faster than you'd expect. The show's own sources don't fully lay all of that out. There are gaps And in those gaps, fans have built things, filled in her history, made connections, decided what she must be, and a lot of that is genuinely clever, and a lot of it has hardened into the kind of thing people repeat like it's settled. So let me just flag it plainly, the way I'd want a friend to flag it for me. The detailed accounts of CJ's origins that float around out there should be treated as speculation. Fans have theorized. Nothing official confirms most of it. So if I stay a little general about exactly what she is, that's not me being coy. That's me refusing to make something up and feed it to you at 2 in the morning when you can't fact check me. What we know for certain is what the show shows us, and what the show shows us is a person who fit him. Let's build on the solid ground and leave the rest as the open question it actually is. Now, across season 5, the show finally lets the thing between them move. And the way it moves is so perfectly painfully in character for Mordecai that I grin and wince at the same time every time I think about it. There's an episode, season 5, episode 26, called I Like You High, and it aired in May of 2014. And the whole pivot of it, the thing that finally cracks the door open, is a text message. Mordecai means to text CJ. He means to say something to inch toward the truth of how he feels. And his phone, in that small everyday act of digital betrayal we have all suffered, autocorrects the message into an accidental confession. He ends up sending her, essentially, that he likes her. Not on purpose, not in some brave moment where he finally found his spine, by accident. Because his phone did the thing your phone does, and the title is right there in the wreckage of it, I Like You High. That mangled little half sentence, the kind of thing autocorrect spits out, a feeling and a fumble crammed into the same breath. And I have to stop and just love this for a second because of how true it is to him. For years, this guy could not say the words, could not get them out, not to anyone, not when it counted. And when the words finally escape him, they don't escape because he conquered his fear. They escape because a machine made the choice for him that's so honest about a certain kind of person it almost hurts. Sometimes the only way the truth gets out is when something takes the decision out of your trembling hands entirely. The phone said what the man couldn't. And honestly, who among us hasn't watched a message send a half second before we were ready and felt our whole stomach drop through the floor? That specific horror, the little whoosh sound, the no, wait, the staring at the screen willing it to come back. We've all stood in that exact spot. The show takes that universal small panic and hangs an entire turning point on it, which is so right for this character it almost aches, because the most important thing he ever manages to communicate, he communicates entirely by mistake. And the lovely, merciful thing the show does is it doesn't punish him for it. Picture the other version, the cruel version, where the accidental text lands wrong and ruins everything, and the episode is about damage control. That's the easy joke, and the show doesn't take it. Instead, the accident lands soft. It opens something instead of closing it. The mistake turns out to be the bravest thing the cowardice could produce, and the universe, just this once, lets him off the hook for not being able to say it on purpose. There's a real tenderness in that choice, in a show deciding that a fumble done in good faith deserves a second chance rather than a punchline. Because then comes the part that, for a while, just plain works. Season 5, episode 37, the season finale, an episode simply called Real Date, and it aired in August of 2014. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. Mordecai and CJ on a romantic date. A real one. After all the seasons of imagined dates and rehearsed dates and dates that existed only in the panic theater of his own head, here is an actual, real happening date between two people who like each other. And the show titles it Real Date, almost like it's underlining the word for you, like it knows the weight that word carries after everything that came before. Real. Not a fantasy. Not a will they won't they. The thing itself finally in the room. I want to pause the walk for just one moment, right here in the good part, the warm part, before any of it goes wrong, because this is the kindest place to say it. If you're the kind of person who likes a show pulled apart slowly and tenderly like this, sitting with the feelings instead of rushing past them, it would genuinely mean a lot to me if you stuck around for the rest. That's all. No big pitch. Just if this is your sort of company for a quiet night, I'd be glad to have you along for the back half of the story. Okay, back to the two of them, while things are still good. And here's what made that relationship special, the thing I really want you to feel, because it's the whole reason the ending hits the way it does. It was healthy. It was mutual. It was, by every sign the show gives us, a genuine step up from everything that came before. This wasn't Mordecai aching across a distance at someone who barely registered him. This was two people who actually liked each other liking each other back, in the same direction, at the same time. The old dynamic had always been lopsided. One person doing all the feeling, all the wanting, all the suffering, while the other lived their life unaware. With CJ, for the first time, the feeling went both ways. They shared interests the way the show had promised back in season 3. They could just be around each other. And I want to dwell on that word ease, because it's so easy to undervalue, and it's secretly the whole point. There's an ease to it that the earlier pining never had, because pining is exhausting and one-sided, and this finally was neither. Think about what the earlier years actually looked like. All that effort, all that rehearsal, all that bracing yourself before every single interaction like you're walking onto a stage. Love as a performance you might flunk. And then look at what the show lets him have with CJ. Two people who can sit in the same space without one of them quietly dying inside. Two people who can laugh at the same dumb thing at the same time and not have it mean 100 terrifying things. That's not the fireworks version of romance the early show kept reaching for. It's the warm kitchen light version, the version that actually lasts when it's allowed to, the version where being together is restful instead of nerve-wracking. And here's the quietly radical part. A lot of stories don't even know how to draw that. They only know how to draw the chase, the obstacle, the will, they won't they? Because longing is dramatic and contentment is hard to make exciting. But the show drew the contentment anyway. It slowed down and let two characters simply be good for each other on purpose, where you could see it. Which is exactly why what comes next does the damage it does, because you weren't watching a fantasy curdle. You were watching a real, working, healthy thing, the kind you actually root for, get taken apart. Let me mark this next part clearly as my reading, because I think it's the key to the whole arc and I don't want to smuggle an opinion past you as a fact. The way I see it, the CJ relationship is the show growing up alongside the people watching it. For years, it treated romance the way a lot of young stories do, as a prize. A thing you win, a door at the end of a quest, and if you're brave enough and you say the right words and you don't chicken out, the door opens and you get the girl and the credits roll. That's a kid's idea of love, honestly. Love is a trophy at the end of a level. And the CJ arc quietly throws that idea out. Read this way, the show stops treating romance as something to be won and starts treating it as something fragile, something you can hold and then break, something that can be ruined not by a villain or a misunderstanding, but by your own unfinished feelings. That's the adult version. That's the version where getting the person was never the hard part. Keeping them while you're still secretly carrying around old wreckage you never dealt with, that's the hard part. And the show grew up enough to tell that harder story. Because here's where the crack starts. It's small at first, almost nothing, the kind of thing you could miss. But Margaret, the person Mordecai pined over for all those earlier years, never quite leaves the frame. She lingers, off at the edges. A presence. And the quiet, devastating cleverness of how the show handles it is that she doesn't have to do anything wrong. There's no betrayal here, no scheme, no love triangle in the cheap soap opera sense. It's quieter and more human than that. It's just that the old feeling never fully closed. Mordecai got something real and good with CJ, but the door to the past stayed open a crack. And through that crack, a little draft kept blowing, cold and persistent, on the back of a relationship that otherwise had every reason to last. The fracture isn't loud. It's a slow thing. A hairline, the kind of damage you can ignore for a long time, right up until the moment something puts weight on it. And then the show puts weight on it, and it chooses the cruelest possible place to do it, and I genuinely admire how merciless this choice is. The breakup happens at a wedding. Season 6, episode 28, the season finale, called Dumped at the Altar, and it aired in June of 2015. And the wedding isn't theirs. That's the knife. The wedding belongs to Muscleman and Starla. Starla, his fiancée, and then his wife, the two of them at the absolute peak of their story, the happiest day either of them will ever have. The day everything they wanted comes true. And it's there, inside someone else's joy, surrounded by celebration, that Mordecai's whole thing comes apart. There's an awkward speech. He gets up to speak the way you do at a wedding, and it goes wrong, the words tangling the way they always did with him. And Margaret is present, there in the room, the past standing physically in the same space as the present. And between the speech and her presence and everything that had been quietly fracturing underneath, the relationship with CJ breaks. Right there, at the altar, on the best day of his friend's life. Let me paint the room for you, because the setting is doing so much of the cruelty and you might be drifting and miss it. A wedding? Everyone dressed up? Everyone soft and happy and a little teary the way people get? The decorations, the seats in their neat rows, the whole space arranged to point at one idea, which is that love wins and two people are about to promise to stay. That's the air in the room. Warmth, celebration. The good kind of nervousness. And into that exact air, that hopeful, dressed up, everybody watching air, the show drops Mordecai's quiet catastrophe. He's standing up to speak for his friend, holding a microphone, supposed to be celebrating someone else, and the speech goes sideways, and the woman from his past is sitting right there in the crowd, and the whole carefully built thing he had with CJ comes down around him while the party is still happening. Nobody pauses the wedding for his heartbreak. Why would they? The music doesn't stop. The cake is still cut. His private collapse just happens in the corner of someone else's beautiful day, unnoticed by almost everyone, which is somehow so much lonelier than if the world had stopped to acknowledge it. I have to just sit with how brutal that staging is, because it isn't an accident. Let me mark this as my reading too, but I think it's almost impossible to see it any other way. Putting the breakup at a wedding is the show being deliberately pointedly bitter. A wedding is the single most optimistic thing a story can show you. It's the symbol we use for love working, love lasting, love getting its happy ending in front of everyone you know. And the show drops its saddest romantic moment directly into the middle of that symbol. What this suggests, the way I read it, is that the show is insisting on something hard and true, that most stories are too kind to say out loud. One person's happy ending can sit right beside another person's quiet collapse. They can happen in the same room, at the same hour. Muscle Man gets the love of his life on the very day Mordecai loses his. The confetti is still in the air. Nobody's day stops being beautiful just because yours is ending. That's not how the world works, and the show knows it, and it stages the contrast on purpose, so you can't look away from it. And then there's the title, and I have to point at the title, because the title is where the cruelty gets really sharp and really clever. Dumped at the altar. Say it and you think you know exactly what it means. Being dumped at the altar is the oldest heartbreak image we've got. The bride or groom left standing alone while the other one runs, the wedding that doesn't happen, love collapsing at the very last second. That's the phrase. That's what it conjures. Except that's not what happens to the people getting married. Muscle Man and Starla aren't dumped at any altar. Their wedding goes through. They get their day. The phrase doesn't describe them at all. It describes Mordecai. He's the one dumped, in a sense, while standing right next to the altar at a wedding that isn't his, on a day built for somebody else's love. So the title carries two meanings at once, and they cut in opposite directions. There's the wedding, the real one, the happy one, the altar where a marriage actually begins. And folded right inside the same three words, there's the heartbreak, the dumping, the love ending in the shadow of the love that's lasting. One title, a wedding and a breakup, holding hands, pointing at each other. It's the whole bitter contrast of the episode compressed into the name on the screen, and the more you turn it over, the worse and the better it gets. I think about that for a long time, honestly longer than maybe I should. Because of everything the show could have done with the end of this relationship, it picked the version that hurts the most and means the most at the same time. It didn't let him lose CJ in some quiet private scene where he could fall apart alone. It made him lose her in public in his nice clothes, at a celebration, with the past literally standing in the room and his own fumbling mouth helping it along. It made the loss his own fault in that aching, no-villain way, the way real losses usually are. Nobody did this to him. He did it to himself with the help of a feeling he never finished putting down. And the show framed it inside the happiest day of a friend's life, just so you'd feel the full, lopsided unfairness of how joy and grief refuse to take turns. And what stays with me about this whole stretch, sitting here talking you through it, is how much braver it is than the show needed to be. It could have just given Mordecai the girl and let that be the win, the prize. The door at the end of the quest, the way the early seasons would have done it. Instead, it gave him something genuinely good, and then let him break it, slowly. Then all at once, at a wedding, under a title that means two things. That's a show that decided its audience had grown up enough to be told the truth about love. That getting it isn't the end of the story. That the past doesn't politely disappear just because the present is good. That you can ruin a real thing with an unfinished one. And I keep turning that last idea over, because it's the part that feels the most like something a real friend would tell you at 2 a.m. The part that isn't really about a cartoon at all anymore. You can have done the work to find a good thing, and still lose it because there's a room inside you that you never went back and cleaned out. That's not a failure of love. It's a failure of finishing. And almost nobody warns you about it when you're young. Because when you're young, the story always ends at the kiss and the credits, and nobody shows you the part where the old feeling you thought you'd outgrown comes wandering back into the room at the worst possible moment, on someone else's wedding day, with a microphone in your hand. The show showed you that part. It refused to let the kiss be the ending. It said, here is what actually happens. Here is the unglamorous truth. The thing breaks not because it was fake, but because you brought your old wreckage to it. That's the adult heart of these middle seasons. And it earns every bit of the sadness it spends, because it never once cheats to get there. No villain, no contrivance, just a person and the part of himself he never finished, and the quiet ruin that follows. But heartbreak in this park was never only about the young ones fumbling at romance. And there's an older, quieter, far heavier Grief sitting just over the next hill, because before any of these characters were born, the Yeti who keeps them all alive had already lost someone he could not save. But the deepest sadness in this show was never in the romances, it was hiding inside its calmest, oldest character, the one who only ever moved by skipping. And there is a reason for that. You've seen him do it 100 times. While everyone else walks across the park, he skips, every single time. A big, ancient, white-furred Yeti, the steadiest hand in the entire cast. The guy who fixes the carts and lifts the impossible things, and tells the others to calm down when reality starts coming apart at the seams, and he gets from one side of the lawn to the other by hopping along like a kid on the way home from school. For most of the show, you just accept it as a quirk. He skips, that's his thing. It's a little funny, a little sweet, you don't think about it. And that, it turns out, is exactly the trick. The show hid its single heaviest piece of grief inside a movement so light and so silly that you'd never go looking for the weight underneath it. So let's go down there, let's actually descend into one of the show's truly dark, truly obscure depths, because this is one of the corners of regular show that the casual viewer can miss entirely. You can watch 100 episodes and laugh at the skipping, and never once learn where it comes from. The story is buried. It's the kind of thing the show holds back for years, lets you live alongside without explanation, until one day it decides you're finally ready and it sits you down and tells you the whole thing. And when it does, it's not a side gag and it's not a throwaway. It's a half hour. It's one of the most carefully made, most quietly devastating things the entire series ever produced. The show takes its funniest little physical tick, the skip, and it pulls the floor out from under it, and underneath there's a grave. And I want to be honest with you about what kind of descent this is, because regular show had a lot of dark corners, and they weren't all the same kind of dark. Some of them are dark like a haunted house is dark, the fun kind, the kind that makes you grab a blanket and grin, monsters that want to eat your soul, demon hands coming out of the television, the cheerful, gross-out horror the show pulled out every October. That's darkness as a ride. You buy the ticket, you scream, you get off, you're fine. But there's another kind of dark in this show, and it's rarer, and it's so much quieter, and it doesn't want to scare you at all. It wants to hurt you a little. It wants to leave a mark. And the strange thing, the thing I keep turning over, is that the show hid this second kind of darkness even deeper than the first. The horror it put right up front, every Halloween, where you could see it coming. The grief it buried under a Yeti's hop, where you'd never think to dig. Read that way, the show trusted you with the scary stuff easily, and made you earn the sad stuff. You had to stay. You had to keep watching for years. And then, when you'd stopped expecting anything but comfort from this little show, it took you by the hand and walked you straight down into the saddest room it had. Here's the first thing you learn, and it lands harder than it has any right to. Skips was not always Skips. That name, the one we've been saying this whole time like it's just a word, like it's just what you call the big helpful Yeti, that name has a history, and a different name underneath it. Before he was Skips, he was Walks. That's it. Walks. The most ordinary word imaginable for the most ordinary thing a body can do. He walked, like everyone walks, and so that was his name, and there was nothing remarkable about it, and nothing remarkable about him. Just a young guy moving through the world at a normal pace, no skipping, no legend, no fixing reality with his bare hands. Walks. Sit with that for a second, because the gap between walks and skips is the entire story, and we're going to spend the next while crossing it. And notice what the show is telling you just with those two words before any of the plot even arrives. Walks and skips are the same action. They're both just a way of crossing a room. One of them is the most neutral, most forgettable version of moving through the world, the version nobody would ever comment on, and the other is the lighter, happier, bouncier version, the one you only do when something inside you is lifting your feet for you. So the show has quietly built the man's entire arc into the difference between two names for getting from here to there. He started as the boy who just got from here to there, and he ended as the one who skips. You'd think that means he got happier. You'd think becoming Skips is the upgrade, the joy, the good ending. And that's the trap the show sets, gently, on purpose. Because the truth is the exact reverse. The walking years were the happy ones, the ordinary ones, the safe ones. The skipping came after the worst thing imaginable. The lighter name is the heavier life. And I think the show wants you to sit in that confusion for a beat, the way it wants you sitting in a lot of things, half comfortable, not quite sure why the cheerful detail feels like it has a shadow on it. I'll be honest, the first time the meaning of that clicked for me, I had to pause it, not because the episode tells you in some big dramatic way, but because of how small it is. A name swap, a man deciding to be called something else. That's it, and it carries the whole weight. Okay, let me back up. Because to understand the swap, you have to understand everything that forced it. And that means going further down still. And to cross it, you need to understand how an ordinary young Yeti named Walks ends up immortal in the first place. Because that part is pure regular show, which is to say it is completely absurd and completely sincere at the same time. Skips is an immortal Yeti. His immortality was granted to him by a group called the Guardians of Eternal Youth. And I need you to picture these Guardians correctly, because the show absolutely refuses to make them dignified. They are 5 babies. 5 enormous babies, giant infants floating there, chubby and soft, and when they speak in these deep, booming ancient voices that come rumbling out of these little baby bodies. It is one of the strangest images the show ever committed to, and the show plays it completely straight, which is what makes it work. There's no wink. These ridiculous, deep-voiced babies are genuine cosmic authorities, and they are handing out a genuine cosmic burden. And the gap between how silly they look and how heavy their words are is the whole regular show formula distilled into one image. The Keepers of Eternal Life are toddlers with the voices of gods. And I want to stay with that image one more second, because it's so perfectly this show. Of all the ways to picture the Keepers of Eternal Life, the writers landed on babies. The most fragile, most temporary, most just-arrived form a living thing can take, the one that needs the most looking after, the one furthest from understanding death at all. And they made those the eternal ones. They made infancy the thing that lasts forever. Read it however you like, but there's something almost sly in that choice. The idea that the power over endless life sits with creatures who, by every natural law, should be the newest and the briefest. The show loved that kind of upside-down logic. It loved putting cosmic authority in the silliest available container and then refusing to laugh at its own joke, so that you're left holding both things at once, the giggle and the chill, and you can't quite put either one down. And what they grant Walks isn't a gift, not really. It's a job, a duty. There is a creature called Clordbane the Destroyer, and somebody has to fight him. Not once. Not in a single climactic battle that you win and then go home. Somebody has to fight him every 157 years, forever, on a schedule, for as long as the universe needs defending. That's the deal the Guardians offer. You stop aging, you stop dying, and in exchange, you take up the fight against the Destroyer over and over, every 157 years, until the end of time. Think about what a strange shape that is for a heroic destiny. It's not a quest with an ending, it's a shift that never clocks out. And the show frames it exactly that way, as a responsibility rather than a glory, which is so much sadder and so much truer to what the character becomes. And hold on to that number, because the show didn't pick a round one. It didn't say every 100 years or every 1,000 something clean and mythic. It said 157, an odd, specific, almost bureaucratic figure, the kind of number you'd find on a form rather than in a prophecy. And I think that oddness is doing quiet work. 157 years is longer than any normal life. It means that between one fight and the next, an entire world of people is born, grows old, and dies, while he just keeps going. He outlasts everyone he could ever meet, on a clock, again and again, and the gap is so long that by the time the Destroyer comes back around, every face he knew the last time is gone. What this suggests, read this way, is that the real cost the Guardians handed him was never the fighting. The fighting is a bad day every century and a half. The cost is everything in between. The cost is the waiting and the outliving and the watching the world refill with strangers. Over and over, forever. They didn't make him a warrior. They made him the one who stays behind after everybody leaves. Now, here's where I want to slow all the way down, because the engine of this whole story isn't the babies and it isn't the Destroyer. It's a girl. Back when he was still Walks, back when he was young and ordinary and his biggest problem was being young and ordinary, he met someone. Her name was Mona. Some of you know her as Desdemona. That's her too. Same person. He met her in high school, and the two of them fell in love. The real kind, the early kind, the kind that rearranges what your days are for. And here's the detail that the entire show is secretly built around, the detail that turns a quirk into a wound. Mona skipped, she and Walks would skip together every day. That was their thing, the two of them, side by side, hopping along together through their ordinary young lives. Because when you're that happy and that in love, and that young, walking just isn't enough. You skip. The joy doesn't fit inside a normal stride, so it spills out into your feet, and you bounce, and you do it next to the person who makes you feel that way. And I love that the show roots all of this in high school, of all the places it could have put it. Not some grand romance in a castle, not a meeting of destinies. High school. Hallways and lockers in that age where everything you feel is the biggest thing anyone has ever felt. Because that's the age when a small shared habit becomes sacred. When you're 16 and in love, the route you walk together, the inside joke, the way you move down the sidewalk, those things feel like they're carved into the world. They feel permanent, and the cruel genius of starting the love story there, read this way, is that it's the exact age that has no idea how fragile any of it is. They skipped together because they were young enough to believe nothing could touch it. The skipping is the sound of two people who haven't been taught yet that things end. That's why it's so light. That's why it has to be so light, so that the show can make it heavy later by taking one of them away. Picture it for a second, because the show wants you to, and because half of you have lived some version of it. Two kids, side by side, skipping down a hallway, not because anything tells them to, just because the feeling won't stay in their chests. No reason, no audience. Just joy that has to go somewhere. That's the whole foundation. That's the bright, ordinary, unremarkable thing the rest of this story is going to land on top of and crush. Let me just stop here for 1 second, because I think a lot of you can picture this without ever having seen the episode. You've had a version of it, some small physical thing you only ever did with one specific person. A way you walked, a way you laughed, a route you took. And it felt like nothing at the time. It felt like a habit. You had no idea it was the kind of thing that could one day become almost too heavy to carry. Okay, back to them, back to the skipping, while it's still happy, because it doesn't stay happy. And before we go where this goes, because I know where it goes and I want a breath before it, let me just say quietly, if these are the corners of this show that you love, the obscure, painful ones underneath the goofy surface, then having you here for the long haul means a lot, and clicking subscribe is the gentlest way to make sure the next one of these finds you. That's it. That's the whole ask. Now let's get back to Walks and Mona, because the universe is about to come for them. Because the duty doesn't wait. The fight against Clorgbane comes due, the way it always comes due, and Walks has to face the Destroyer. And the battle is happening, this enormous violent thing crashing through the space they're in, and at some point during it, a section of the ceiling gives way. A piece of the world above them breaks loose and starts to fall, and it's coming down right where Walks is standing, and he doesn't see it in time, or he can't move in time. And in the version of the universe where nobody intervenes, that's the end of Walks right there, crushed under falling debris in the middle of a fight he didn't ask for. But somebody does intervene. Mona sees it, Mona is there, and Mona sees the ceiling coming down on the boy she loves, and she doesn't freeze and she doesn't run. She pushes him, she shoves Walks out of the way, out from under it, into safety, and in doing that and spending the half second it takes to save his life, she puts herself exactly where he was. The debris that was meant for him comes down on her instead. And she dies. The girl who skipped beside him every day, the girl whose joy didn't fit inside a normal walk, she dies saving him by trading her place for his, under a falling piece of the sky. And I need you to notice how fast that is, because the speed is part of the cruelty. There's no time for anything, no long goodbye, no last words traded carefully back and forth. No music swelling up to warn you it's coming. It's a fight, it's chaos, the ceiling is already falling, and the entire thing, the seeing and the deciding and the pushing and the dying, happens inside a single breath. She doesn't weigh it. She doesn't get to weigh it. The love just acts before the fear can. That's what real sacrifice looks like, the show seems to be saying. And it's not slow, and it's not pretty. It's a body moving on instinct toward the person it loves, faster than thought, and then the worst possible outcome arriving before anyone in the room can do a thing about it. And here's the detail underneath the detail, the one that I think makes this the single saddest piece of a whole series. She didn't die in some random accident, she didn't die of an illness, or old age, or bad luck on an ordinary day. She died inside his duty. She died in the middle of his fight, the fight the Guardians handed him, killed by debris from a battle that was his to wage. So her death isn't separate from his immortal job. It's fused to it. The thing he protects the universe from is the same thing that took her. And that, read this way, is what makes everything that follows so unbearably tangled, because he can't ever walk away from the fight without also walking away from the place she died saving him. The duty and the wound are the same object. He can't put one down without dropping the other. I need you to feel how brutal the mechanics of that are, because the show doesn't soften it. It's not poetic, not in the moment. It's not a slow fade, it's a push and a fall, and then she's gone. And the boy she saved is standing there alive and unhurt in the spot she put him, holding the rest of his life in his hands. A life he only has because she gave hers up to hand it to him. There is no version of that you walk away from clean. He didn't die in that fight, that's the point. He lived, and living became the heaviest thing that ever happened to him. So now we arrive at the name, and I think this is one of the most quietly perfect choices the show ever made. After Mona dies, Walks changes his name. He stops being Walks. He becomes Skips, and he takes the immortality. He says yes to the Guardians, yes to the deal, yes to fighting Clorgbane every 157 years, forever, without end. Two enormous decisions made in the wreckage of the same loss. He will live forever, and he will never be called Walks again. From now on, he is Skips. And once you know why, the name stops being a quirk and becomes almost unbearable. Read it this way. The thing he and Mona did together, the skipping, the spilled over joy of being young and in love, he takes that and he makes it his name. He carries the way they moved together for the rest of forever, written into the word people call him by. Every time someone in the park yells for Skips, they are saying the name of a dead girl's joy without knowing it. And every time he skips across that lawn, every single time, in the background of an episode that's really about Mordecai and Rigby, breaking a golf cart, he is doing the thing he used to do beside her. He's keeping it alive in the only place he can keep it, in his own body, in the most ordinary movement he has. What this suggests to me is almost too much to say out loud. The Skip we laughed at for years is a man in mourning. It's a memorial he performs 100 times a day and never explains. He turned his grief into the way he gets around, and then he hid it so well that it looks like whimsy. And the immortality is the same gesture, pointed a different direction. The show implies that he didn't choose to live forever because he wanted to live forever. Who would, after that? He chose it as a way of honoring her and as a way of finishing what her death paid for. She died so he could keep standing in that fight. So he keeps standing in it. Forever. Every 157 years, he goes back and faces the Destroyer again. And read this way, each of those fights is him making good on what she bought him. She didn't save his life so he could waste it. So he doesn't waste it, he spends it the only way that makes her sacrifice mean something, by doing the duty she died to let him keep doing. That's not a hero's destiny anymore. That's a debt of love paid out across eternity, one impossible fight at a time. And think about what saying yes to forever actually means, in his shoes, right after losing her. Most stories treat immortality as the prize. It's the thing the villain wants, the temptation, the dream, never grow old, never die, watch the centuries roll by. But the show flips it completely. Offered eternal life on the very worst day of his existence. With the person he loved just gone, he doesn't reach for it because it's a dream. The show implies he reaches for it because it's a sentence he's willing to serve. He'll take the centuries not as a gift, but as the long, hard way of keeping her sacrifice from being for nothing. Read that way, his immortality isn't a reward at all. It's the longest act of mourning anyone could possibly sign up for. He chose to grieve her not for a year, not for a lifetime, but for as long as the universe lasts. And there's one more layer here that I can't stop thinking about. So let me just say it plainly. Choosing to live forever when the person you loved is dead also means choosing to leave her further and further behind. Every year he keeps living is another year between him and the last day he had with her. Immortality doesn't bring her closer. It carries him away from her, slowly, forever, while she stays fixed back there at 16 skipping in a hallway. So the gift the Guardians gave him is also, in a way the show never spells out but absolutely implies, the cruelest possible thing. He keeps her memory alive by living, and the living is the exact thing that keeps pulling him away from her. He's honoring her by walking, no, by skipping in the one direction that takes him further from where she is. Let me just let this sit, because I don't want to rush past it. And honestly, the show didn't either. This whole backstory gets its full telling in Season 5, in an episode called Skips' Story, which aired on the 14th of April in 2014. And it's a half hour, a real one, the show clearing its throat and standing up straight the way it only did for the things that mattered most. And people felt it. Skips' Story sits at a 9.7 out of 10 on IMDb. That's one of the highest rated episodes of the entire series. Out of everything, all the chaos and the giant fists and the portals, the episode fans rate near the very top is the one where the show stops being funny for a while and quietly explains why its calmest character moves the way he does. That tells you something. That tells you what people were actually here for, underneath the leaf blowers. And I think this is the moment the whole series quietly admits what it really is. Because here's the read I keep coming back to, and it's the thing that reframes everything we've been talking about. This is a show called Regular Show about two lazy friends raking leaves, and it chose to take its quietest, steadiest, most reliable character, the one who never seems rattled, the one everybody leans on, and it put its single deepest wound inside him. Not the loud character, not the dramatic one, the calm one, the one who's always fine. And that's a deliberate design. What this suggests, and it suggests it without ever once saying it directly, is that the calmest people around you might be the ones carrying the most. That steadiness isn't the absence of pain. Sometimes steadiness is what pain looks like after you've carried it long enough to stop dropping things. The guy who fixes everything for everyone, who never falls apart, who skips cheerfully across the lawn, is the guy holding a grief so old and so heavy that he had to become immortal to keep living with it. And that idea lands differently at 3 in the morning, doesn't it? When the house is quiet and you start thinking about the people in your own life who never seem to need anything, the ones who are always okay, you start to wonder what their skip is. What ordinary little thing they do every day that's actually a memorial to something they never mention. That's the show admitting it's about grief. Not in the finale, not with a speech, but here, halfway through its run, hidden inside a half hour about a Yeti who hops. It told you. It told you that underneath the slacker comedy and the cosmic nonsense, this was always a story about loss, and about what people do with loss when they can't put it down, when there's no end to it, when you just have to find a way to keep moving through the years carrying it. Some people walk, and some people, the ones who loved hard enough and lost badly enough, they skip, because once upon a time it was the only way their happiness would fit, and now it's the only way they have left to keep that happiness in the world. So when the show finally turned to face its own ending, to the dome going up over the park, to a graduation none of them saw coming, and to the launch that would throw all of them up into space, it was carrying exactly this lesson with it. That the most ordinary lives are the ones quietly holding the biggest things. And here's the thing that still gets me about how this show ended. For most of its life, it stayed on the ground. It stayed in that one little park with the same battered golf cart and the same snack bar and the same overgrown patches of grass that never quite got raked, because the 2 guys assigned to rake them would rather do almost anything else. That was the entire world. A coffee shop, a house, a fountain, a bunch of trees. The stakes, when they got big, always came crashing into that small space from the outside. A board game possessing the house, a wizard hurling lightning over the snack bar. The danger arrived, and then the danger left, and the park remained, scuffed and ordinary and exactly where you left it. The ground was the promise. No matter how strange a night got, by morning Mordecai and Rigby were back on the same patch of dirt, holding the same rakes, owing the same debt of effort they kept failing to pay. And then, in its final stretch, the show did something nobody really saw coming. It pulled the entire park up off the earth and pointed it at the stars. Not as a dream. Not as a one-off gag that resets by the credits. It lifted the ground itself, the whole stage everything had ever happened on, and it flung it into space, and it never came back down. The place that had always been the anchor became the spaceship. And once you've seen the ending, you start to realize the show had been quietly setting that up for longer than it let on. Let me back up, because the seams are subtle and I want you to feel how sneaky this was. Somewhere in season 7, the park starts changing in a way that doesn't fit the usual rhythm. There's this dome, a strange structure goes up, a kind of geodesic shell, and Benson and the gang are made to work on it, and the show is weirdly cagey about what it's for. Normally, regular show tells you what the threat is within about 30 seconds. A guy shows up, he wants the high score, he wants the parking spot, he wants the soul, fine, off we go. But the dome just sits there. Construction keeps happening in the background of episodes. Nobody fully explains it. There's this low hum of mystery threaded through a season that's otherwise still doing its normal thing, still doing the petty arguments and the impossible errands and the nights that spiral out of a single dumb decision. The dome is just there, in the corner of the frame, getting built, and you're not sure if it matters or if it's set dressing. That ambiguity is the trick. The show is hiding the engine of its own finale in plain sight, dressed up as just another weird park project. And honestly, on a first watch, you don't clock it. I didn't. It reads like background texture, the kind of running visual gag this show loves, which is exactly why the payoff lands the way it does. Now, while that dome is quietly humming away, the show does something tender and completely earned with the character who least deserves a reward and most needs one. Rigby, the screw-up, the guy who has failed at basically everything for the entire run, who quit high school, who coasts, who lets Mordecai carry him, who turns every shared task into a disaster through sheer laziness and pride. The show gives him a graduation. There's an episode, Rigby's Graduation Day Special, Season 7, the 36th episode, June of 2016, and the premise is that Rigby is finally going to graduate high school, and not just graduate, but give a speech broadcast on national television. Rigby writing a speech for everyone to watch. Sit with how big that is for this specific character. This is a guy whose defining trait for years was that he wouldn't grow. He wouldn't do the work. he wouldn't finish the thing. The whole engine of his friendship with Mordecai was two people stuck at the same arrested stage, refusing in tandem to become adults. And the comedy came from how comfortable they were down there in the muck of not trying. And here the show says, no, this one finishes something. This one stands up in front of the world and earns the diploma he threw away. The perpetual failure gets handed actual growth, real and unironic, the kind the show usually undercuts with a joke. For once, it doesn't undercut it. It lets it be sincere. And the song they reach for in that moment is the detail that wrecks me a little. They use an old song by The Replacements called Here Comes a Regular. Read this way, that's not a random needle drop. That's a quiet thesis statement hiding in the soundtrack. Think about what the show is called, Regular Show. The whole title is a shrug, a joke about ordinariness, about how nothing here is special, it's just regular. And then, at the exact moment the show is about to stop being ordinary forever, it scores the scene with a song literally about an ordinary person, somebody small and unremarkable walking into a familiar place. The show implies, with that choice, that it knows what it's been the whole time. It's been a story about regular people in a regular place. And it's saying goodbye to that idea right as it pulls the rug. Because here's the turn. Here's where my jaw was on the floor the first time. The graduation is the trap. While Rigby is up there, while the speech is happening, while the show has lulled you into thinking this is a warm character milestone episode, the dome finally does what it was built to do. The episode reveals the dome experiment's true purpose. And the true purpose is this. The entire park gets lifted off the planet and launched into space. The graduation special is the delivery mechanism for the single biggest structural change in the history of the show. You came for a kid getting his diploma. You stayed for the ground itself tearing loose from the earth. The two threads, the tender one and the mysterious one, the growth of Rigby and the silent humming dome, snap together in one moment, and the small world you'd trusted for 7 seasons is suddenly hurtling away from everything it was ever attached to. Give me a second, because I think that's one of the boldest swings I've ever seen a comedy cartoon take. Think about what it cost them to do that. Every show like this lives on its setting. The setting is the comfort, the constant, the thing you return to. To rip it up isn't just a plot beat. It's the show betting its entire identity that the ending is worth more than the safety. And read this way, launching the park into space is Regular Show making its central metaphor physical, turning a theme into an actual object. For the whole run, these characters were stuck in the same jobs, the same arguments, the same refusal to move forward, the same small orbit around a fountain and a snack bar. The park was a stand-in for that stuckness, for the small world they couldn't seem to leave. And now the show takes that small world and literally fires it into the cosmos, which is to say, it forces these characters out of the only life they knew, whether they were ready for it or not. Nobody asked Rigby if he was ready to leave the ground. Nobody asked any of them. The show just decided that growing up means the floor disappears under you, and you go up, and there's no version where you stay where you were. The metaphor stops being a metaphor. It becomes the literal premise of the next season. And that next season is the commitment, the part where you realize they really meant it. Season 8 is titled Regular Show in Space, and it premiered in late September of 2016 with an episode called One Space Day at a Time. In Space, the title of the show now has the word space stapled to it. The park is gone from the Earth, and the new normal is the void. There's no quiet return to the snack bar, no morning where the grass needs raking again. The slacker comedy about two guys avoiding yard work is now officially a show set among the stars, and when that season arrived, it arrived with a flag planted on it. It was announced right at its premiere as the final season. So this wasn't a soft drift toward an ending. This was the show saying, out loud, we are leaving the ground, and once we leave it, we are done. The space is the end game. The launch was the point of no return. Now, I want to fold in one more thing because it happened a little earlier and it matters for understanding how the scale crept up on everyone. Before the park ever left the Earth, the show went to the movies. There's a theatrical film, Regular Show the Movie, and it premiered in late November of 2015 on Cartoon Network. It was directed by J.G. Quintel, the guy who made the whole thing, and crucially, it's canon. It's not a side story you can wave away. It counts. It slots into the timeline after the 6th season, and it does something a regular episode never could, which is open up the scale of what this world is allowed to be. A film gives you room. It gives you a bigger canvas, a bigger threat, a bigger sense that this little park sits inside something vast, and because it's canon, that bigger scale isn't a vacation from the real story, it's part of the real story. The movie is the show clearing its throat, stretching to a size it had mostly only flirted with, and getting the audience used to the idea that Regular Show could be epic without losing itself. So you line it up and a shape appears. The movie expands the scale and makes the big version official. The dome hums quietly through season 7, hiding its purpose. The graduation pays off Rigby's growth and then doubles as the launch. And season 8 commits the whole thing to space and to the end. Each step takes the show a little further off the ground, until there's no ground left. And I should be honest about what that shape is and isn't. Some fans read all of this, the dome, the launch, the move to space, as one long-planned arc, a master design that was steering the entire series toward a cosmic finale from way back. It's a lovely idea, the notion that the small park episodes were always secretly building to the stars, but nothing official really confirms a grand plan lay from the start. The show's own sources frame this more as a late-stage turn, a decision made when the end was in sight, than as a blueprint drawn up in season 1. Fans have theorized the deep-laid version. And I get why, because the pieces fit so cleanly in hindsight. The honest answer is that it looks like a show that found its ending and then aimed everything it had left at it, rather than a show that always knew. And maybe that's even better. Maybe the more moving version is the one where they got to the edge of the run, looked at these characters they'd kept small on purpose for years, and decided the only way to finish was to let them go big. What stays with me is the nerve of it. A show whose entire joke was ordinariness, whose title is basically an apology for how unremarkable it's pretending to be, choosing to end by abandoning the ordinary completely. It scores its heroes one real moment of growth with a song about a regular person, and then in the same breath, it stops letting any of them be regular. It takes the floor away. It points them at the stars. After this, there's no going back to the park as it was, because the park isn't on the Earth anymore, and neither are they. Which leaves only the last question this whole strange voyage was built to ask, the one waiting out there in the dark once the ground is gone, the one about Pops and his impossible twin and what it actually costs to break a cycle that's older than anyone in that park. And out there in space, the show finally told us the truth about the gentlest character in it, the lollipop man who only ever wanted everyone to be happy, and the truth was bigger and sadder than anyone was ready for. We need to slow down here. This is the part of the story I want to sit inside for a while, because everything the show had been quietly building toward, every odd little hint, every moment where Pops seemed to know something the rest of them didn't, it all arrives now, and it arrives heavy. So let me take it gently, the way you'd want a hard truth told to you late at night. If you've never seen this far into the series, I'm going to describe it so you can picture it even with your eyes closed. And if you have seen it, you already know the particular ache that comes with this stretch, the way the laughs get quieter and quieter until they stop. For 8 seasons, Pops Maillard was the soft heart of the park, the man in the red suit with the enormous round head, the lollipop-shaped fellow who clapped his hands together and said "good show" with this delight that never seemed to run out. Picture him for a second if you can't quite call him to mind. That pale, perfectly round face, almost like a balloon with the little tuft of hair on top, and those wide eyes that always looked faintly amazed by the world, as if everything in it were a small wonder he was seeing for the first time. He moved through the show in his own bubble of old-fashioned politeness, talking like someone from a much older, gentler era, calling people jolly good chaps, getting genuine joy out of the tiniest things. A new flavor of candy. A nice afternoon, a friend remembering his name, he was the one who was kind when no one else could be bothered. He believed the best of everyone, sometimes to the point where it was funny, because the world of this show is so often cynical and tired and over it, and here was this gentle soul who genuinely thought tea and good manners and a little optimism could fix almost anything. And the thing is, the show let you laugh at him for it, for years. He was the soft target, the one who didn't quite get the joke, the one who needed protecting from a world that was sharper than he was. There's a kind of running tenderness in how the other characters treat him, this unspoken agreement that Pops is precious and a little fragile and must be looked after. You spent years assuming he was just that. A sweet, slightly out-of-touch rich man's son, a comic relief grandpa figure, the heart you don't examine too closely because hearts aren't supposed to need explaining. He was the soul of the place, and souls, you figure, are just there. They don't come with an origin story, they don't come with a price. And then the show pulls the floor out. Because Pops was never just a kind old man. His real name, the show tells us, is Megacranus, and he isn't from this world at all. He's an alien born on a distant planet called Lollyland, and that round head and that gentle face and that endless bottomless kindness, none of it was an accident of personality. It was the whole reason he exists. This reveal lands in season 8 in an episode called The Ice Tape, and the way it's delivered is so much sadder than a twist usually is, because a twist is normally a thrill, a gotcha. And this one doesn't feel like a gotcha. It feels like grief. It feels like learning a secret about someone you love that explains every gentle thing they ever did and makes all of it heavier. I remember the strange double feeling of it, watching that click into place. On one level, your brain is doing the puzzle thing, going, oh, of course, the round head, the lollipop shape, the name Lollyland, it all fits. The show was telling us all along. And on another level, underneath the puzzle, there's this quiet drop in your stomach, because the answer to the puzzle isn't fun. The answer is that this gentle man you've loved for years was built, made on purpose, shaped into kindness, not because he happened to be kind, but because something out there in the universe needed him to be, and the needing of it is where the sadness lives. A person who chooses to be good is one thing. A person who was created to be good, with no say in the matter, and then handed a destiny to go with it, that's something closer to tragedy wearing a smile. Let me just sit with that name for a second. Megacranus. It sounds enormous, doesn't it? Almost mythic. And that's the point. The little man we watched fret over picnics and clap at sunsets is, underneath, something vast and ancient. And here's the cruelty of it, the thing that makes my chest tight every time. He wasn't made to be vast and ancient and kind for his own sake. He was made to be exactly that good, that pure, that gentle, because the universe needed something to weigh against its opposite. Pops, this creature of pure good, doesn't exist alone. He was born a twin. His brother's name is Malum-Cranus, though by the time the story reaches us, he goes by Anti-Pops. And you can feel the wrongness of him in the name itself, the negation, the anti, the thing that exists only to undo the other. The two of them were born together on Lollyland, two halves of a single cosmic equation. And where Pops was created as the embodiment of pure good, Anti-Pops was created as the embodiment of pure evil. And not by accident, not because something went wrong in the nursery. By law, by cosmic law. The universe, the show tells us, requires balance. If you're going to have something as completely helplessly good as Pops, the scale demands an equal and opposite weight on the other side. And so Anti-Pops was brought into being for no reason other than to be the dark that matches the light. And visually, they're a mirror, which makes it land even harder. Where Pops is round and pale and warm, all soft edges and that open, hopeful face, Anti-Pops is the same basic shape gone wrong. The same big head turned cruel, sharper, colder, a version of that gentle silhouette poured full of menace. It's like looking at someone you love reflected in a black mirror. The resemblance is the horror of it. You can see the brother in the monster and the monster in the brother, and you can never quite separate them. Think about how lonely that is for a moment on both sides of it. One brother made to love everything, the other made to hate it. Neither of them chose it. And here's the part I keep snagging on. The part that turns Anti-Pops from a simple villain into something genuinely tragic. He never had a chance. He wasn't a good person who went bad. He wasn't corrupted. He didn't fall. He was switched on as hate, the way you'd switch on a light, and then sent out into existence to play the role he was assigned. Pops at least got to feel joy, got to love things, got centuries of clapping at sunsets. Anti-Pops got nothing but the weight of being the dark half. If you've ever felt like the world decided who you were before you got any say, like you were handed a part you never auditioned for, there's something in Anti-Pops that might land closer to home than you'd expect from a cartoon bad guy. And here's where the story stops being a family drama and becomes something closer to a myth, the kind of thing you'd find carved into stone in an old culture. A story about the shape of time itself. Because these two brothers aren't just fated to dislike each other. They're fated to fight. The cosmic law that made them also binds them to a battle. And not a one-time battle, not a single climactic showdown. A recurring one, every 14 billion years, Pops and Anti-Pops are destined to face each other for the fate of the entire universe. 14 billion years. That's longer than our universe has even been around by most counts, which means we're talking about a span of time so enormous it stops meaning anything to a human brain. It's not history. It's geology of the soul. It's the slow grinding wheel of existence, turning over and over. And here's the part that genuinely got me the first time I understood it. Every single one of those battles across all that unimaginable time has ended the same way, in a stalemate. Pure good and pure evil are, by definition, perfectly matched. Neither can ever truly beat the other, because they're equal by design, they're two sides of the same coin flipped over and over and always landing on its edge. So the fight grinds to a draw every time, and when it draws, the universe doesn't just stay as it is. It resets, the whole thing wipes clean and starts again, and the two brothers are reborn, and the clock starts ticking down another 14 billion years toward the next battle, which will also end in a stalemate, which will also reset everything. Over and over and over, forever, with no exit. I have to stop and just feel how bleak that is. Because the show, this goofy show about two guys who didn't want to rake leaves, has just quietly described one of the loneliest predicaments I can think of. Imagine being born, knowing you're good, knowing you love the world, and knowing that the only thing waiting for you at the end of an unfathomable stretch of time is a fight you cannot win against your own brother that will erase everything and force you to do it all again and again. Forever. That's Pops' inheritance. That's what was sitting behind that gentle smile the whole time. He carried that somewhere deep down while he was clapping at fireworks and worrying about whether everyone had enough cake. While we're sitting in the heavy part, let me just say one quiet thing, friend to friend. If this slow, careful way of walking through a story is the kind of thing that helps you drift off, or just helps you see something you loved in a new light, it would genuinely mean a lot if you subscribed, because these long ones take a while to make, and knowing a few of you are out there listening in the dark is honestly what keeps me doing it. That's all. Now let me get back to it, because the next piece is the one that makes the whole thing devastating. The show gives us a way to actually see this endless history, and it's one of my favorite ideas in the entire series. The small detail that opens up like a trapdoor under everything. On Lollyland, there are ancient chronicles, records of all the battles that came before, and these chronicles take the form of tapestries. Woven images like the old story cloths you'd find in a medieval hall, the kind of thing that hangs in a cold stone room and tells the history of a people in pictures because the events are older than writing. Each one depicts a previous clash between Pops and his brother across the eons. And there's a reverence in how the show treats them. They're not a quick gag, they're presented like sacred objects, the recorded memory of a world, and you're meant to feel small standing in front of them, the way you'd feel small standing in front of something genuinely ancient. And when you look at these tapestries, when the characters look at them, they see something that stops the breath. The figures fighting alongside Pops in those ancient woven scenes, in battles that happened billions and billions of years ago, in universes that no longer exist, are them. Prior incarnations of the park crew. Mordecai and Rigby, Benson, Skips, Muscleman, the whole gang rendered in thread, fighting beside Pops in cycle after cycle, stretching back into the dark. Not lookalikes, not coincidences. Them, woven into the oldest history of an alien world, standing shoulder to shoulder with Pops in wars that ended before the Earth they live on had even formed. Just let that sink in for a second, because I think it's one of the most beautiful and strange things this show ever did. These 5 idiots, these slackers and screw-ups and people who spent the better part of a decade arguing about video games and trying to get out of work, they've been here before. Not these exact ones, not with these memories, but versions of them, again and again, summoned across the resets to stand at Pop's side when the universe comes due. Read this way. The tapestries imply something the show never says out loud, but lets you feel in your bones, which is that this goofy friendship was never an accident. The bond between these characters isn't a coincidence of one lifetime, 2 guys who happened to get hired at the same park. What this suggests is that they have been finding each other and standing together and fighting for each other for billions of years across countless dead universes every single time. And I find that honestly unbearably comforting. Because if you've ever lain awake feeling like the people you love came into your life by random luck, like it could just as easily not have happened, the show offers this gentle counter idea woven into a wall hanging. What if none of it was accidental? What if you were always going to find them? What if some bonds are older than the universe and just keep finding their way back? I want to flag something here, so I'm being honest with you. There's a question fans have chewed on for years, which is exactly how many of these cycles have happened. How many times has the universe reset? How many tapestries are there? Some fans have looked closely at the background details in those scenes and estimated the number at around 20 past cycles. But I want to be clear that number is not confirmed anywhere in the show itself. The series never gives you a count. It's a piece of fan estimation built out of squinting at the screen, and it should be treated as speculation, nothing more. The show is content to leave it vast and uncountable, which honestly works better. You're not meant to do the math. You're meant to feel the weight of a number too big to hold. So that's the trap the show lays out for us, and for Pops. An eternal cycle. A brother he's fated to fight. A stalemate that's already happened countless times and will keep happening countless more, resetting everything good that was ever built, erasing every friendship, every park, every quiet morning with a cup of coffee. Forever. And the whole series has been marching toward the moment when these two finally meet again. The clock has run down. It's time for the 14 billion year battle once more. The finale is called a regular epic final battle, and the show gave it room to breathe, a 33-minute special built in 3 parts, with the final stretch titled The Power. 33 minutes is a lot for a show that usually told its stories in about 11. They gave this ending 3 times the room of an ordinary episode, and you can feel them using every second of it, slowing down, letting things hurt, refusing to rush the goodbye. And for a while, it plays out the way you'd expect an epic to play out. There's a fight, there's spectacle. Pops and Anti-Pops go at each other with everything they have, the two enormous round figures hurling power across the void, the whole of reality shaking around them, and you sit there bracing yourself because you understand the rules now. You know how this is supposed to end. You know that if Pops wins, it can't actually be a win because pure good can't truly overpower pure evil. They're matched. And you know that a stalemate means the reset means the loop snaps shut again and the whole horrible thing repeats. So you're watching this final battle with a kind of dread that's different from normal action movie tension. In a normal finale, you're worried the hero might lose. Here it's worse, because you've understood the trap and you can see that winning and losing lead to the same place. If he loses, the universe ends. If he wins, the universe resets and the whole nightmare begins again. And he forgets, and they forget. And in 14 billion years, two brothers who don't remember any of this will stand in the dark and do it all over. Every path you can see leads to the same locked door. The fight, no matter who lands the final blow, just feeds the machine. And that, I think, is the most quietly horrifying thing the show ever set up. The idea of a conflict where victory itself is the trap. And then Pops does the thing that breaks the entire machine. The thing that, the more I think about it, the more I believe it might be the single most quietly radical idea this show, or honestly a lot of shows, ever put in front of children at 5 in the afternoon. He doesn't try to win. He stops trying to win. Let me describe what actually happens. Slowly, because it deserves to be told slowly. In the middle of this cosmic brawl, this fight he has fought and drawn a number of times too large to count, Pops makes a choice that no version of him in any of those tapestries ever made. He realizes that the only way the cycle ends, the only way the universe ever stops resetting, is if the battle does not end in a stalemate. And the only way it doesn't end in a stalemate is if he stops fighting it on its terms. So instead of striking his brother, instead of trying to overpower the embodiment of pure evil, Pops reaches out to him. He chooses to reconcile. He pours his own emotions, his goodness, his love, everything he is directly into Anti-Pops. He feeds it into his brother, this creature made of nothing but hatred, and he holds on to him, and together the two of them fall. Pops pulls them both down into the sun of Lollyland, the star of the world where they were both born. And there, in the fire, the cycle ends. Pops sacrifices himself. He gives up his own existence, and in doing so, he saves the universe, breaks the reset, and stops the loop that is turned for longer than time itself. I need a second with that, I really do. Because think about what he actually did. Pops didn't defeat his brother. He saved him. In his last act, the gentlest character in the whole show looked at the embodiment of everything cruel and hateful, the thing that existed only to destroy him. And he didn't see an enemy to be beaten. He saw his brother, and he chose to share himself with him, to give him the one thing Anti-Pops had never been allowed to have, which was to feel something other than hate. And then he carried them both into the sun so that no one, not them, not anyone, would ever have to do this again. And I keep coming back to that gift, the emotions he pours into his brother, because of everything in this ending, it might be the tenderest idea of all. Anti-Pops was made empty of everything but cruelty. He'd never felt warmth, never felt love, never felt the simple, ordinary happiness Pops felt over a cup of tea. He was a being with a hole where a heart should be, by design, by law. And Pops, in his final moments, doesn't punish him for being what he was forced to be. He fills the hole. He gives his brother, for the first and only time in 14 billion years, the feeling of being loved. That's what reconciliation means here. Not a handshake, not a truce. It's one brother handing the other everything he was denied, knowing it will cost him his life, and doing it anyway because he understands that the monster was only ever a brother who was never allowed to feel anything good. There's a mercy in that so deep, it almost stops being a kid's show at all. Read this way, the moral the show is reaching for is genuinely radical for a comedy, especially one that started with leaf blower jokes. It's telling you that you do not defeat pure evil by becoming stronger than it. You can't. By definition, you can't. The scale always balances, the fight always draws. What the show implies instead is that the only way out of a cycle of conflict is to refuse to play it on its own terms, to stop trying to win and choose love instead. To choose sacrifice over victory, Pops doesn't break the loop with power, even though the final chapter is literally called The Power. He breaks it by giving his power away, by emptying himself into the thing that hated him, by deciding that ending the cycle mattered more than being the one left standing. And there's something almost unbearably tender in that. The idea that the strongest thing you can do is lay your strength down. And here's the part that I think makes it land so hard. The part that connects it back to everything we've been talking about all along. All those hours about two friends who didn't want to grow up. This whole show, underneath the aliens and the time travel and the talking gumball machines, has always been about ordinary people learning to do hard things they'd rather avoid. Mordecai and Rigby spent years dodging responsibility, running from anything that asked them to be braver or kinder or more grown than they wanted to be. And here, at the very end, the softest one of them all, the one who never seemed to carry any weight at all, turns out to have been carrying the heaviest weight imaginable the entire time. And he meets it not with a clenched fist, but with an open hand. The man who only ever wanted everyone to be happy makes everyone safe forever by letting himself go. That's the summit of it. That's the thing the whole strange, beautiful series was climbing toward without ever telling you. The good show, the one Pops kept clapping for, was this. This was the good show. Him choosing love at the cost of himself, so the rest of them could simply go on living their small and ordinary and precious lives. I think about how the others must have felt, watching him do it, knowing what it cost, knowing he could have just fought and drawn and reset and forgotten, and none of them would have even known what they'd lost. But he didn't. He remembered, and he chose, and he left them. And there's a particular grief in being saved by someone, in living because somebody else decided you were worth more than their own existence. It's a debt you can never repay, and it isn't even asked of you, which somehow makes it heavier. They get to keep going, all of them, get to keep their park and their petty arguments and their small ordinary days, and the price of all that ordinariness was the one person among them who loved ordinary things the most. And the love that's in that choice, the sheer enormous gentleness of it, is the kind of thing that stays with you long after the credits, sitting in your chest at 2 a.m, asking you what you'd be willing to give up for the people you love. That's the question this gentle cartoon leaves in your hands, dressed up in candy colors and silly voices so it can slip past your defenses while you're not looking. It got me. Years later, it still gets me. A show about doing the least possible amount of work somehow built its way, episode by goofy episode, to a hero whose final act was to do the most generous thing a person can do, and to do it quietly, with kindness, without ever once raising his voice. The Good Show. He kept calling for the good show all those years, and at the very end he made it himself, out of his own life, and handed it to everyone he loved. But of course, a sacrifice like that leaves a hole, and the people left behind still have to wake up the next morning, and the morning after that, and somehow learn how to live in a world that the gentlest among them died to save. Which is exactly where the story takes us next, jumping forward across the years to show us what becomes of all of them long after the dust settles. And here's the thing about that sacrifice, the one that stretched across billions of years, the one where a soft, kind, slightly ridiculous man finally became the only thing strong enough to end a war as old as creation itself. After all of that, after a battle that swallowed up time the way the ocean swallows a single drop, the show could have done anything. It could have gone bitter. It could have ended on the cosmos, on the stars, on some final ringing note about destiny, and instead it does the smallest, gentlest, most human thing it can possibly think of. It looks away from the heavens, it lowers its voice, and it skips forward in time to show us, quietly, that everyone got to grow up. Everyone got to be okay. The universe was saved, yes, but more than that, the people in it got to keep living ordinary lives inside it. And the show wants us to see those lives slowly, one by one, like turning the pages of a photo album that somebody has clearly loved for a very long time. So the grief, the enormous cosmic grief of losing Pops, doesn't get the last word, it gets held, and then it gets set down. The camera pulls back from the wreckage of that final fight, and the music softens, and the next thing we know, 25 years have passed, a quarter of a century. Long enough for kids to become parents. Long enough for a couple of slackers who once spent entire afternoons arguing about whose turn it was to rake the leaves to have become, somehow, without ever quite meaning to, adults. And I have to tell you, the first time you reach this part, there's this strange ache in your chest, because you've spent the whole show watching these two men dodge exactly this. Dodge growing up. Dodge responsibility. Dodge the future. And now here it is, and it isn't scary at all. It's beautiful. It's the reward. Let me sit you down in it, because the show takes its time here, and so should we. Mordecai, the bird who spent years too anxious and too unsure of himself to commit to anything, who froze up at every fork in the road, who could barely admit what he wanted out loud, is a painter now. A successful one. His art is up on walls. It means something. People stand in front of it and feel things. And he fell in love. Not with a ghost of his past, not with someone he was chasing to fix an old wound, but with another artist, someone who sees the world the way he does. He's got a family, he's got a life that fits him. Think about that for a second. The whole show, Mordecai's biggest enemy was never a demon or a monster or a giant hot dog with a grudge. His biggest enemy was his own hesitation. That little voice that said, maybe later, maybe not, maybe you're not ready. And 25 years on, that voice has gone quiet, and what's left is a man doing the thing he loves, with the people he loves, and it's so calm, so unremarkable, so regular, that it almost sneaks past you how enormous it actually is. And then there's Rigby. Oh, Rigby. The raccoon who couldn't hold down a single shift without breaking something, who lied his way out of every chore, who treated effort like it was a personal insult. He married Eileen, the mole who liked him patiently, kindly, for years, who saw something in him that he could barely see in himself. And they didn't just get married, they built a whole life. A house full of kids. A real loud, busy family, the kind that fills a kitchen with noise. The laziest character in the entire series, the one who fought adulthood harder than anyone, ended up with the fullest, most demanding, most grown-up life of all of them. And I love that the show does that on purpose. It doesn't reward Rigby for being responsible. It just shows him discovering, late and almost by accident, that the responsible life, the life with people depending on you, with mouths to feed and bedtimes to keep, is not the prison he always feared. It's the thing that finally makes him into someone. Honestly, every time I get here, I have to pause for a second and just breathe, because it gets me. It really does. But the show doesn't stop with the two leads, and that's part of why this ending lands the way it does. It goes down the whole crew, the whole strange little family of misfits who worked that park, and it gives each of them a tomorrow. Benson, the gumball machine with the permanent migraine, the boss who spent the entire series red-faced and one bad day away from a meltdown, lonely in a way the show never made fun of, just quietly let you feel. Benson finds love. He and Pam become a couple, the two of them overseeing a new generation of park workers. And there's something so right about that. The angry, exhausted man who held that whole place together for years, getting to grow soft, getting to have someone, getting to stand back and watch new kids fumble through the same jobs he once did. The man who never got a break gets the rest of his life. And the screw-ups, this is the part that always undoes me a little, because the show could so easily have let the screw-ups stay screw-ups. Muscle Man, who is really named Mitch, the sweaty, gross, lovable mess who told the same joke about his mom roughly 400 times, who you would never in a million years have predicted could be anyone's husband or anyone's father. He's got a family now, him and Starla, the woman who loved him exactly as he was, mustard stains and bad jokes and all, and High Five Ghost, the gentle little phantom who floated quietly at Muscle Man's side for the entire run, the sidekick. He and Celia become DJs, and not struggling ones, successful ones, the kind of life nobody would have written for that character if they were only thinking about who deserved it. That's the move the show keeps making here. It's not handing out happy endings to the people who earned them by being good. It's handing them out to everybody, especially the messes, especially the ones who spent years being the punchline. The slackers, the loudmouths, the gross ones, the anxious ones, the angry ones. They all made it. Every single one of them got a life that turned out tender and full. And read this way, that's not an accident, and it's not just the show being nice. There's an argument buried in it. Because if you'd asked, early on, which of these characters had their life together, the answer would have been none of them. Not one. They were a park full of failures and oddballs and people running from the future. And the show's quietest, firmest belief, the thing it tells you here without ever saying it out loud, is that those people, the unfinished ones, the ones who were never going to have it figured out, get to grow into good lives anyway. Not because they fixed themselves overnight, just because they kept going. Because they kept showing up day after regular day until the days added up into something. Then comes the reunion, and this is where the grief and the joy finally fold into each other, where the show lets the two feelings sit in the same room. The crew comes back together after all those years, older, settled, changed, and they gather at the park, the place where all of it happened, the place where they raked those leaves and fought those monsters, and grew up without noticing. And there, standing in the open air, is a statue of Pops, the man who saved them, the man who saved everything. And right next to it, the show raises a second statue for Mr. Maillard, the park's owner, Pops' father who has died in the years that passed. Two statues, side by side, father and son, together again in bronze, watching over the place that outlived them both. And the crew stands in front of them, and they take a family photo. That's the word for it. Not a work photo, not a team photo, a family photo. Because that's what they became, somewhere along the way, between the chores and the chaos and the years. A family. And you feel the absence in that picture as much as the presence, the two figures in stone who can't stand in the frame anymore, and somehow that makes the picture warmer, not sadder. It makes it complete. I need to stop here for a second because the next thing the show does is so quiet and so strange and so perfect that it changes everything that came before it, and I don't want to rush past it. After the photo, after the reunion, after we've watched all these grown lives unfold, the camera does something unexpected. It pulls away, up, out, somewhere else entirely, and we find Pops. Pops, who died. Pops, who gave himself up to end the war. And he's sitting somewhere peaceful, somewhere bright and soft and kind, an afterlife, or something like one, and he's watching a screen. And on that screen is the show, our show. The whole series, Pops is watching regular show on a VHS tape. He's watching all of it, every episode, every ordinary day, every stupid argument over a video game, and every brush with the end of the world, from wherever he is now, with his gentle, contented look on his face. As if he's getting to see it all one more time. As if the whole thing, every minute we just spent together, was his to keep. And what that suggests, the thing it gently opens up in your mind right as you're drifting, is enormous. Because if Pops is watching the series from the afterlife, then maybe the series was never just a story happening in real time. Maybe, read this way, the whole show was a kind of memory, a eulogy, something already lived, already loved, already grieved, being played back one last time by someone who isn't there anymore. And if that's true, then every ordinary episode you ever watched, every lazy afternoon at that park, every dumb little adventure was already glowing with the soft light of looking back. We were watching something that had already been loved and already been lost the whole time, and we just didn't know it. It gives the whole series this tender, backward-looking warmth, the feeling of an old home video, the feeling of someone going through the days of a life they treasured and finding that even the small ones, especially the small ones, were precious. Now, I want to be honest with you about this, the way a good friend would be, because the show leaves it deliberately open. Whether Pops literally lives on in some afterlife, actually sitting there watching the cast like a guardian who never really left. Or whether that final tape is a metaphor, a quiet image for the show itself, for the act of remembering, for the way stories let us hold on to people after they're gone. The show does not tell you. It refuses to tell you. And fans read it both ways. Some are certain Pops is really there, really watching, really at peace, that the show is promising you he survived in spirit. Others see the tape as the show talking about itself, about memory, about how a story is a way of keeping someone. Nothing official settles it, nothing confirms one reading over the other. And I think that ambiguity is the point. The show hands you the most comforting possible image and then lets you decide how literally to believe it, which is when you think about it exactly how grief actually works. We're never quite sure where the people we lost have gone. We just know we keep them by remembering. So let me bring this all the way back around now, back to the question we started with, the one that's been sitting under every single thing we've talked about. How does a cartoon literally called Regular Show, a show about two lazy friends raking leaves at a park, end up being a story about immortality, about grief, about a gentleman dying to save the universe? And what was it quietly trying to tell us the whole time about ordinary life? And here at the very end, the answer finally shows itself, and it's been hiding in plain sight in the title from the first episode. Because the show ends not on a cosmic battle, not on stars or destiny or one more impossible threat, but on quiet adult lives. On a painter and his family. On a married couple with a house full of kids. On a tired boss who finally found someone. On the screw-ups, settled and happy. That's the ending. That's what all the sacrifice was for. And that's the show's final answer to its own name. The regular, ordinary future, the boring, beautiful, everyday life, the thing none of these characters thought they wanted, was the reward all along. It was the thing worth saving the universe for. Not in spite of being ordinary. Because of it. Think about everything the show ever threatened these people with. Time itself, God's the void, the literal end of all things, and every single time what they were really fighting for, underneath the spectacle, was the chance to go back to normal, to go back to the park. To go back to the chores and the arguments and the slow regular Tuesdays, the cosmic stakes were never the point. They were the contrast. The show kept blowing the scale up to the size of the universe so that, by comparison, you'd finally see how impossibly valuable the small stuff was. A friend at your side while you do a job you don't want to do. A person who loves you despite your worst habits. A quiet afternoon that you'll only understand was precious once it's behind you. The show called itself Regular Show as a kind of dare. It dared you to think regular meant boring, meant small, meant nothing. And then it spent 8 years and the entire fate of creation proving that regular was the most precious thing there is. That an ordinary life, the kind almost everyone gets, the kind you might be living right now, is not the thing you settle for when the adventure ends. It's the thing the adventure was always trying to protect. And maybe that's the kindest idea the whole show ever offers, and it's a good one to carry with you as you start to drift off. That your regular days, the ones that feel like nothing, the ones that blur together, the ones you barely remember, those are the ones that matter most. That the friend you waste an afternoon with, the dumb little routine, the job you complain about, the person beside you on the couch, that all of it, the whole unremarkable shape of an ordinary life, is exactly the thing somebody, somewhere in some story would give up the entire universe to keep. The small days were never the waiting room before the real story. They were the real story. They were the point the whole time. And there's one more small comfort to leave you on, because the show, in a way, isn't even fully over. Years after that finale aired, the same creator announced this little world would return, a revival, with the same voice for Skips, the same hands guiding it, and what that suggests is the gentlest possible thing to fall asleep believing. That this place we love isn't entirely gone, that the park is still there, that somewhere, somehow, there are still ordinary days left to spend in it. Which leaves us with just one last thing to do together, one final quiet thought to settle into, before the lights go all the way down. A closing reflection on what it means that a show about nothing turned out to be about everything. So here we are, at the quiet end of it, you and me. A gentle man shaped like a lollipop walked into the heart of a sun and pulled his own twin in with him. And the cycle that had reset the universe over and over finally stopped, because somebody made of pure good decided he would rather end than let it begin again. That's the cost. That's what the softest face in the whole show was carrying the entire time. The secret is fully out now. The fool was never a fool. He was the oldest, kindest thing in the story, and he spent himself to buy everyone else a future. There's nothing left to reveal about Pops. We know him completely now, and knowing him hurts in the best way. And the man who taught us that the calmest people carry the most, the Yeti who skips, he gets to set the grief down a little. After everything, Skips' long mourning has been seen. We know why he moves the way he moves. We know whose joy he's been keeping alive in his own 2 feet all these years. That weight got honored, finally, out loud, instead of hidden under a quirk. And then the show does the thing I can't stop thinking about. It comes back down, it leaves the sun, leaves the cosmic stakes behind, and it jumps ahead and you watch these 2 screw-ups, these 2 guys who would not rake a single leaf, simply grow up. They get married, they make families. The arrested kids who refused to become adults just quietly became them and found something most stories don't bother to film. Ordinary contentment. A regular life, and that's the answer. That's the whole thing the title was whispering from the start. A show called Regular Show was always about how an ordinary life is the thing worth saving the universe for. The regular days were never the boring part of the story. They're the reward at the end of it, the leaves and the coffee and the dumb arguments and the people sleeping in the next room. That's what Pops died for, not the cosmos and the abstract. This, the small, unremarkable regular stuff. And the last gift the show gives him is the gentlest one. Pops gets to watch it all unfold from somewhere beyond, the whole story playing back like a memory someone loved enough to keep. As if these 8 years were always a tape being lovingly replayed. As if the ordinary life he saved is the thing he gets to rest inside, forever. Thank you for staying with me all the way down here. Truly. It means more than you know that you let this story keep you company tonight. So let your eyes close now. Your own small regular night is enough. It always was. And if you'd like the next one of these to find you in the dark, a quiet subscribe is all it takes. Sleep well.